Chapter 391. Schools nowadays paid attention to humanized teaching. Whether it was kindergarten, primary school, or secondary school, a qualified teacher would always prevent the children from facing these problems directly. Of course, there were also many retarded teachers who would not care about these details at all. Knowing that there were children in the class who had lost their father at a young age, the teachers still assigned similar essay topics, such as, my father, father, I want to tell you, father's love, and so on. If this was not retarded, then what was? How should the children write? Should they rely on their imagination to make it up? In fact, this was not an essay at all, but a sharp knife inserted into the children's chests. The children were still so young. If they could enlighten and encourage themselves to successfully walk out of their psychological trauma, then all the child psychologists in the world could be fired. According to the education philosophy of Donghua Gate Kindergarten, this kind of situation was absolutely not allowed to happen. Once the principal found out, the teacher would immediately pack up and leave. Therefore, after hearing the brothers shout that they did not have a father, even the teacher was shocked. It was human nature to be exclusive. Most of the children in the class were either rich or respectable. They had lived in different circles since they were young, so naturally, they were more exclusive than ordinary children. Without a father, the brothers were the outliers in the eyes of this group of children. Outliers would always be excluded. When the children shouted, "Wild children," for the first time, the brothers were labeled as outliers on their foreheads. Regarding this problem, the brothers were very calm. The two of them stood upright in the middle of the classroom, and there was no intention of avoiding the gaze in their eyes. Because in their eyes, this was the truth. And the facts also proved that they only needed their mother and grandpa. Of course, the brothers did not have much of a reaction, mainly because they had not experienced what Nyan had experienced. They had not been ridiculed and ostracized by children of the same age, so naturally, they did not understand that the words, "no father," could not be said casually. The class suddenly became lively. Seeing this, the teacher could only quickly signal for everyone to be quiet. But at this moment, the little girl at the side suddenly flipped out. "Don't talk nonsense." Nyan stood up from her seat and then shouted at the class with righteous indignation, "They are not wild children." The little girl was very angry. On one hand, it was because the two brothers were the closest to her. On the other hand, it was because she had a deeper understanding of the word wild child. She didn't like those three words, so naturally, she wouldn't allow others to say that about her little friend. Wenwen and Mingming's father is on a business trip. My father used to go on business trips too. He only returned after a very long time. That's why they called me a wild child. Let me tell you. I'm not a wild child. My father is back. He comes to school every day to bring me home. Wenwen and Mingming's father will come back too. I'm not a wild child. They are not wild children. We are not wild children. While speaking, the little guy suddenly burst into tears. After all, he was still a child. It was not easy for her to defend herself under such circumstances. After Nyan's interruption, the teacher finally came back to his senses and immediately comforted her. Then, the teacher used Nyan's words and began to guide the children in the class. Everyone's parents were not at home sometimes, so they couldn't be called wild children because of that, right? In order to prevent the two brothers from causing trouble again, the teacher didn't even dare to let them speak again. He directly let them sit back in their seats and play a little game with Nyan. When Nyan gradually stopped crying, the teacher decisively changed the theme of the day, and then led the children to sit on the small train outside the house. There were 3 teachers in a class. The main teacher made such a big mistake, so the teachers in the side class should report it to the principal. But considering that everyone was in the same boat, the teachers in the side class concealed this matter. The small disturbance soon subsided. Nian little face showed a smile again, but the two brothers' faces showed a thoughtful expression. Perhaps from this moment on, the shadow of their father gradually emerged from the bottom of their hearts. Shi was like a bystander, silently watching the whole process. To be honest, when he saw Nian stand up and passionately defend the two brothers, he, as a father, was really shocked. That feeling was hard to describe. In short, Nian's performance today made him very satisfied. He didn't raise his daughter in vain. Dad will always love you. Forever and ever. Happy, Shi called the big cat who had been squatting on the wall pillar and dozing off. Then, he scraped a layer of skin from the elixir and threw it to the big cat. This guy was lying on the school wall every day, doing nothing but sleeping. Today, the leader happened to be inspecting, so he was happy and gave it such a big gift. It was really a blessing from the sky. The big cat happily jumped around Shi's feet like a dog. Shi was waiting for the little guy to finish school while thinking about the two brothers. He really had to find time to talk to old Gu. Regardless of the grudge between Xia Kaiji and Gu Yao, the child was innocent. How could he instill such thoughts in the child? This kind of thinking was unacceptable. Shi was seriously thinking about the child's education, but he didn't notice. He hadn't been in seclusion for a long time to seek a breakthrough. He clearly had an epiphany some time ago on Daiyu Island. Now, he only needed to concentrate on seclusion, and the day he came out would be the day he reached insightful emptiness. But even so, Shi still didn't plan to go into seclusion. Because he had to pick up Nian from school every day, cook for Nian, and play with Nian, these trivial matters took up too much of his time, and made him live more and more like an ordinary person. The life of an ordinary person was trivial, nothing more than some household chores. He could even do nothing all day, just stay outside Nian's classroom and watch his daughter grow up day by day. Actually, to put it bluntly, in his current state, he didn't deserve to be a cultivator at all. Cultivation didn't just fall from the sky, it had to be accumulated bit by bit. It was also because of this that Qin Shuoqing sometimes felt very strange. Did Shi really not need to cultivate? Nian was very cute. But because of Nian, did he really have to completely give up on cultivation? As a qualified martial arts fanatic, her sister-in-law really didn't understand Shi's approach, so she also talked to Shi. In this regard, Shi's attitude was more resolute than she imagined. Nian was indeed more important than cultivation. If he had to choose between Nian and cultivation, Shi would also choose the former without hesitation. You say it's trivial, but I say it's deep and meaningful. Probably only Shi himself could understand the meaning behind it. You're under too little pressure. This was the last sentence Qin Shuoqing said to Shi before she went into seclusion. Because in her opinion, Shi was simply a nouveau riche. Once he had a little money, he began to forget himself. He was busy taking the child around all day and didn't care about his own career at all. One had to know that his current stability came from his previous accumulation. Once these accumulations were exhausted, was he going to take the child and sell vegetables on the streets? This was the difference in values. Chapter 392. December 22nd, Winter Solstice. Although this year's winter came late, the snowfall was not much worse than last year's. Snow fell like goose feathers. After a night, a thick layer of snow piled up in the alley. The little guy had been talking about skating all day, but he did not know that the ice rink in Hohai would not open for another month. Everything was the same as usual. After the little guy cuddled with Shi as usual, he got up and went to school. Shi stayed behind the wall until he finished watching the little guy do his morning exercises. Then, he slowly strolled back to Dongming Alley like an ordinary person who got up early for a walk. But what was different from usual was, Shi met an acquaintance at the entrance of the alley today. Mr. Qin, long time no see. The person was Jiang Yan. Jiang Yan was wearing a long black down jacket and a gray wool hoodie on his head, hiding his long hair. Jiang Yan's current appearance, he looked no different from the young people you could see on the street. The only difference was that he still had an outstanding temperament that was as deep as the abyss. Why are you here? She never thought that Jiang Yan would come to Shangjing and even find him at his door. So the moment he saw Jiang Yan, he was a little surprised. Could it be that this old guy had been stuck in the soul crystal for too long and wanted to wander around after taking over his body? Actually, it's like this. After I took the elixir you gave me, I realized that this elixir was extraordinary. You must have added a lot of rare herbs in it, right? Jiang Yan laughed. After seeing Qin extend his hand and make a please gesture, he immediately followed Qin into the courtyard. The visitor was a guest, so he had to at least show some basic courtesy. So, Qin led Jiang Yan to the main hall and made him a pot of tea. I did add a lot of things, but they are just some common herbs. The most important thing is your adumbra flower. After hearing Qin's words, Jiang Yan immediately laughed and said, the Jiang family doesn't have such exquisite alchemy skills like yours. After your careful concoction, this adumbra flower really showed its medicinal effects. If that's the case, the Jiang family has really profited. Jiang Yan seemed very happy. Seeing this, Qin laughed a few times. She was too lazy to be polite with him. As long as he was happy, it was fine. In fact, after Qin thought that this elixir would definitely end up in Jiang's stomach, he cut the Jiang family's portion in half, and planned to leave the other half for Lin Xian. After all, he should not let the goodies. The old man had been hiding in the soul crystal for so many years, so he probably had accumulated a huge amount of vital energy. Thinking about it, this little bit was not too much, and this little bit was not too little. He just had to make do with it. To be honest, based on the amount that Jiang Yan had consumed, it was probably not as effective as directly swallowing the adumbra flower. Therefore, even if Qin used her but to think, she knew that the old man must have other motives for coming to her door today. Alright, you don't have to be so polite with me. Qin did not have the time to talk nonsense with him, so he asked directly, tell me, why did you come all the way here? Hearing this, the smile on Jiang Yan's face became even more cheerful. Actually, it's nothing much, I just wanted to come out for a walk and pay you a visit. At this point, Jiang Yan's gaze fell on the couplet in the middle of the main hall. The heavenly gate is broken, the river opens, the jade water flows east. However, his gaze did not linger for long, then he put on a rather emotional expression and sighed. White clouds for 1,000 years, the sky is long, look at this world, where does it look like it used to? When I came here, I even took that big guy called an airplane. If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I definitely wouldn't believe it. Now, even mortals can ride the clouds and travel thousands of miles in a day. It's just like what the ancestors said, a day in the mountains is 1,000 years in the world. I think it's time for Daiyu Island to change its philosophy. The Jiang family can't always live in the past. We should try to integrate into the present. The old man was a chatterbox, and once he opened his mouth, he would not stop muttering. After listening for a while, Qin felt a headache coming on, so he found an excuse to send him out. No wonder everyone said that the older a person was, the more long-winded they became. This old man had been holding it in for thousands of years. If he really let him continue, wouldn't he talk for 3 days and 3 nights? Alright, then I won't disturb you. Have a good rest, I'll go to the Great Wall again, haha. Jiang Yan stood in the alley and waved goodbye to Qin with a smile. After Qin chuckled, he didn't even bother to exchange pleasantries, and directly closed the door. Bye-bye to you. Jiang Yan didn't feel offended at all. When he turned and walked out of the alley, there was even a faint smile on his face. After that, Jiang Yan strolled leisurely on the streets, looking around from time to time. He looked like a tourist who had just arrived in the city. However, Just as Jiang Yan walked out of the main street, a figure suddenly appeared beside him. Jiang Yan glanced at him and said coldly, "There are people coming and going here, can't you wait until there's no one before you appear?" Hearing this, that person said indifferently, "They're just a bunch of ants, so what if they see us? They'll only think that their eyes are playing tricks on them." Enough. Jiang Yan seemed to be quite dissatisfied with this person's approach, so his face turned cold on the spot. However, that person still didn't care, but looked around curiously, especially at the complicated structure of the viaduct not far away. If Qin Shi were here, he would definitely feel very puzzled. Since when did Jiang Jingqing dare to talk to Jiang Yan like this? That's right, the middle-aged man walking side by side with Jiang Yan at this moment was Jiang Jingqing, who was previously beaten into the ground by Qin Shi. Although Jiang Jingqing was arrogant and unruly, he was still a member of the Jiang family, and the Jiang family's ancestral teachings had long been branded in his blood and marrow, so naturally, he couldn't be so disrespectful to Jiang Yan. So the person in front of him. It couldn't be Jiang Jingqing at all. Don't blame me for not warning you, this Mr. Qin isn't someone you can afford to offend. If you want to overthrow Heaven Capital, then you must need his help, and you can't afford to be on bad terms with him. Seeing Jiang Yan's serious look, Jiang Jingqing also withdrew his previous frivolity and became much more serious, so he replied in a deep voice, "I know." Seeing this, Jiang Yan didn't say anything more. The reason he suddenly came to visit Qin Shi today was to let his companion see Mr. Chen's abilities. Not to mention Mr. Chen's cultivation, it wasn't difficult to see that this person was definitely not someone to be trifled with just by looking at the restrictions inside and outside the four-part courtyard. Jiang Jingqing obviously knew his limits. However, after a moment of silence, he couldn't help but ask, "I still feel a little strange. You and I have lived for thousands of years, so why haven't we heard of such a person in the world? Are you so sure he's not from Heaven Capital?" After hearing Jiang Jingqing's words, Jiang Yan didn't immediately answer, presumably thinking about the reason behind it. After a long while, Jiang Yan frowned and said, "It shouldn't be. Based on the strength this person has shown before, he's at least above the level of a divine general, or even at the level of a heavenly venerable. Over the years, no divine general has defected from Heaven Capital, and no heavenly venerable has died, so he can't be from Heaven Capital. Moreover, I think Wushu really doesn't seem to know him." Hearing this, it was Jiang Jingqing's turn to be silent again. It wasn't until the two of them walked side by side for a long distance that Jiang Jingqing said with a serious face, "I think this matter needs to be considered at length, so don't act rashly." Chapter 393. December 24th, Christmas Eve, Christmas Eve. With the rapid development of Huaxia over the years, the common people gradually began to understand and accept Western culture. Christmas was the most important holiday in Western countries. No matter how much Donghua Gate Kindergarten promoted traditional culture, they could not deliberately ignore it. Otherwise, how was it different from closing the country off? Therefore, Christmas was the only Western festival that Donghua Gate Kindergarten celebrated. Since it was a holiday, they naturally had to arrange themed activities. Playing with the children was secondary. The school mainly wanted the children to understand the differences between Chinese and Western culture more easily and understand the meaning of Christmas. They also hoped to cultivate the children's interest in learning English. After all, no matter how Huaxia developed in the future, it was imperative to integrate with the international community. Therefore, learning English was definitely beneficial to the children. The winter break would start in the middle of next month. Therefore, the kindergarten would usually set this day as the Winter Parent-Child Activity Day, requiring the parents to attend. The parent-child activity could not only promote the emotional exchange between the children and their parents, but it was also beneficial to the healthy growth of the children's body and mind. Naturally, its importance was needless to say. The kindergarten hoped that every child's parents could be present. For this reason, they gave the parents a notice half a month in advance, which could be considered as leaving sufficient time for the parents to prepare. Chin Roying originally wanted to participate. However, because she had taken the largest portion of the elixir some time ago, if she did not go into seclusion to digest it in time, much of the medicinal effect would be wasted. The Adumbra flower was so precious. Wouldn't it be a pity to waste it? Chin Roying's aptitude was very ordinary. If she did not rely on external help, then when would she be able to break through to the celestial being level? Chen Shi had no choice but to repeatedly persuade her. After the little fellow said that she must let her mother have a good rest, Chin Roying reluctantly returned to her room and went into seclusion. Chin Roying could not be present, and Chen Shi had other arrangements that day. Therefore, he had to find someone to take care of Nian for him temporarily. This important task, naturally, it fell on his sister-in-law's shoulders. For this, Chen Shi specially called out his sister-in-law, who was in seclusion. Qin Xueqing had always been impatient with Nian, as if she didn't like children. However, Chen Shi knew very well, Qin Xueqing was a typical example of a woman who said she didn't want to, but her body reacted honestly. Nian was taken care of by her sister-in-law, but the brothers were in trouble. The last time the two of them complained in the classroom that they didn't have a father, so Qin Shi wanted Xia Kaiji to attend the Christmas party in person, hoping to ease the estrangement between father and son. After all, blood is thicker than water. When Qin Shi proposed this idea, although Gu Lao still felt a little uncomfortable in his heart, he did not speak out against it. On the other hand, the reaction of the two brothers was obviously a bit too extreme. We don't have a father. No. No. There isn't. We don't want daddy. I just want my mother. The two brothers said one after another, and no matter what, they refused to acknowledge this father. This made Xia Kaiji, who was hiding outside the tea house, so sad that he shed tears. When he received Qin Shi's call, Xia Kaiji was full of joy, thinking that Gu Lao had finally forgiven him. Unexpectedly, the children actually refused to acknowledge him. How could Xia Kaiji not feel sad? Qin Shi tried to persuade the two brothers, but how could children easily give in when they were stubborn? Whoever tied the bell should untie it. Qin Shi suddenly thought of Gu Yao, so he used the soul crystal to directly summon Gu Yao's soul back. After this period of recuperation, Gu Yao more or less recovered some of her consciousness. After being summoned by Qin Shi, she quietly floated over the tea house and saw everything that happened in front of her with her own eyes. Gu Lao sat in the booth sullenly. The two brothers stood on the side crying endlessly. Xia Kaiji hid in the corner and silently wiped his tears. From the day she passed away, this happy family had already been shattered. Gu Yao was just an ordinary person, without the support of a profound cultivation base. Even with Qin Shi's help, how long could her soul last? 3 years. 5 years. Or 10 years. In the end, she would disappear from the world, just like water evaporating. Not a single trace of her could be found. She was gone, but the children were still there. Even after 10 years, they would only be 15 or 16 years old teenagers. Gu Lao was already old. Did he really want them to grow up alone like wild children, without anyone to rely on? Gu Yao was persuaded by Qin Shi, and she finally figured it out. After the resentment that had shrouded her heart for a long time dissipated, her soul seemed to be a little purer. Then, Gu Yao quietly came to the two brothers. She didn't know what she said to the two brothers, but they quickly quieted down and obediently followed Qin Shi out of the tea house, standing in front of their biological father again. Daddy, the two brothers hesitated for a long time, and then finally called out, Daddy. The moment he heard these two words, the man who was shining in the workplace finally couldn't hold it anymore. He knelt on the ground, his hands tightly hugged the two brothers. Because of a moment of excitement, Xia Kaiji actually let out a whimper. I'm sorry. Yao Yao. I'm sorry. He touched the two brothers' face, looking at them who obviously grew a lot taller. His tear-stained face couldn't help but reveal a trace of smile. I'm sorry, it's all Daddy's fault. Daddy let you suffer. I'm sorry, Ao Yao. I regret it so much. Xiao Kaiji repented painfully, but he didn't know that every word he said now floated into Gu Yao's heart without missing a single word. Gu Yao came to Xiao Kaiji's back, as usual, gently hugged him from the back. But it was a pity. Xiao Kaiji could no longer feel that kind of feeling from before. Chenxi quietly returned to the tea house, leaving the warm moment to Xiao family's father and son. Sister-in-law sat in the booth, bored to death, flipping through the book, as if she was not interested in everything around her. The Christmas party will only start after school. Nian Nian was still in school. The two brothers were taken out by Qin Shi. Qin Shuiqing seemed to be dissatisfied with Qin Shi because of this trivial matter, so when she saw Qin Shi came over, she rolled her eyes at Qin Shi, and then turned her body to the side. Seeing this, Qin Shi didn't take it to heart, but directly sat in front of her, and smiled and asked, "Let me ask you a question. Why did you say you are cultivating?" Sister-in-law didn't answer. She didn't even bother to lift her eyelids. Qin Shi waited for a while. Seeing that she still didn't speak, he continued to say, "Your so-called cultivation, first of all, is to get rid of the distracting thoughts, not to care about the chaos of the mortal world, or else, if the heart is not calm, it will mess up your actions. But why do I feel? This kind of cultivation is no different from getting rid of feelings. Humans have 7 emotions and 6 desires. Getting rid of feelings, getting rid of desires, is that still a human?" After hearing this sentence, Qin Shuiqing finally reacted. She looked at Qin Shi with a speechless face, and just as she was about to say something, Qin Shi stood up and walked out. Before she left, Qin Shi didn't even look back as she threw down a sentence. This situation was very similar to the last time they talked. I'll also leave you with a sentence: who doesn't cultivate in life? Through the years of wind, frost, rain, and snow, feel the mellow and long life, the gains. Chapter 394. 7:00 in the evening. The lanterns were lit, and the night was still dark. Shangjing City was shrouded in darkness, and the Forbidden City was sleeping soundly. Donghua Gate Kindergarten, which was only a street away from the Forbidden City, was brightly lit and lively for the first time today. The children had just finished dinner when the Christmas-themed party slowly began. Shangjing's winter was very cold, so the party could only be held in each class. Under Qin Shi's repeated requests, Qin Shuiqing reluctantly walked into the classroom. It had to be said that Qin Shuiqing's image was indeed very outstanding. As soon as she stepped into the classroom, she successfully attracted everyone's attention. The classroom, which was noisy before, instantly became much quieter because of this. Which child's parent is this? So beautiful. Why haven't I seen her before? Is she a star? I don't know, this is the first time I've seen her. Look, she's here, she's here. In the classroom, regardless of gender, age, everyone couldn't help but look at Qin Shuiqing a few more times. There were indeed many good-looking people in this world. Almost all of them were beauties in magazines and on TV, but it was extremely rare to see a beauty in real life. Beauty was one thing, but the other was because of temperament. When a living person stood in front of you, the temperament she exuded would directly affect the overall beauty of this person. Qin Shuiqing was indeed very beautiful. But what was really eye-catching about her was actually her temperament, which was like an iceberg. Extremely beautiful, but at the same time daunting. She was like a holy mountain on the plateau, which could only be looked up at, but could not be climbed. Auntie! Auntie! I'm here. As soon as Qin Shuiqing walked into the classroom, the little girl immediately noticed her, so she excitedly waved her little hand at her. Seeing this, Qin Shuiqing went straight to the little girl and sat down. Qin Shueching had always been indifferent to the little girl, but this little girl was very affectionate to her. Therefore, as soon as Qin Shueching sat down, the little girl very intimately lay on her lap, then raised her little head and asked in a coquettish voice, "Auntie, where's Daddy? Why isn't Daddy here?" "Don't worry, he'll be here soon." "Oh, okay." Hearing this, the little guy nodded obediently, then reached out to pick up a piece of candy from the table and handed it to Qin Shueching. "Auntie, have some candy." "No need, I've already eaten." Oh, after not seeing each other for a long time, the little fellow wanted to be intimate with Qin Shueching, but she didn't expect that Qin Shueching was still indifferent to her. However, the little boy did not mind at all. Instead, he stuck close to Qin Shueching and started to play by himself. "Hello, Miss Qin." Xia Kaiji had already met Qin Shueching before, so he nodded to her politely. However, he was tactful and didn't try to talk to Qin Shueching. After greeting her, he continued to whisper with the two brothers. Xia Kaiji didn't strike up a conversation with Qin Shueching, but Wang Junqing and Zhao Ziyu couldn't hold it anymore. In front of a peerless beauty, as a normal man, how could he not let his imagination run wild? What's more, the two of them had always felt that they were superior. They were rich and powerful, so naturally, they wouldn't shrink back just because Qin Shueching showed a sour face. "Hello, are you Nyan's aunt?" "I am." Wang Junqing tried to talk to Qin Shueching with the help of the child. However, before he finished speaking, Qin Shueching said coldly, "Not interested." After that, Qin Shueching closed her eyes directly and sat in the classroom with her eyes closed. Wang Junqing was given the cold shoulder and had no choice but to get together with Zhao Ziyu resentfully. Although the two of them were nearly 10 years apart, they had the same bad ideas. Therefore, after giving Wang Junqing a look, Zhao Ziyu secretly took out his cell phone and prepared to secretly take a photo of Qin Shueching for investigation. However, the moment Zhao Ziyu turned on the camera, a stream of vital essence hit the cell phone, causing the screen to turn off. Zhao Ziyu fiddled with the cell phone for a long time and found that it couldn't be turned on. He had to take a deep look at Qin Shueching, trying to remember her appearance. Qin Shueching naturally knew what he was doing, so she opened her eyes and prepared to teach Zhao Ziyu a lesson. However, at this moment, a burst of cheerful music suddenly sounded in the classroom. "Ding ding dang, ding ding dang, bell ding dang, how happy we are skiing, we sit on the sleigh, ding ding dang, ding ding dang, bell ding dang, how happy we are skiing, we sit on the sleigh." The moment the accompaniment of "ding ding dang" sounded, all the children in the class sang together with the teacher. This was a surprise prepared by the teacher for the parents. The moment the music sounded, the Christmas lights in the classroom were all lit up. After the teacher took out the Christmas spray and sprayed it on the glass, the atmosphere in the classroom was suddenly pushed to the highest point. Every child's face was filled with the most enthusiastic smile. Since it was a parent-child activity, naturally parents and children had to play games together. The content of the game was very simple, which was to ask parents to accompany their children to make a Christmas card. Looking at the scissors, glue, colored pens, and socks on the table, Qin Shueching's expression froze on the spot. When had she ever made these things in her life? But she had no choice. She had already promised Qin Shi that she would take care of Nyan for him. Even if Qin Shueching was unwilling now, she had to be patient and accompany the little girl to pick up the scissors and paintbrush, and began to make the first Christmas card in her life. While teaching everyone how to make a card, the teacher told a short story about Christmas on the podium. The most attractive one was, of course, Santa Claus who gave gifts to every child on Christmas Eve. After telling the story, the teacher motioned for everyone to stop what they were doing for a while, and then announced loudly, "Children, look, who's here?" After that, the teacher pointed to the door of the classroom. Then, Santa Claus, wearing a red coat and a long white beard appeared outside the door. Santa Claus. The moment Santa Claus appeared, the children were in an uproar. He held a big red bag with many small gifts in it. As soon as he entered the classroom, he began to give the children gifts, and at the same time, he gave them an apple that meant peace. Finally, Santa Claus came to the little girl. The little girl eagerly took the apple from the old man's hand, looked up, and found that the face hidden under the beard was particularly familiar. Dad. He was indeed a biological child. Even if she was wearing a beard, the little girl still recognized him at a glance. Dad. The little girl excitedly jumped up and was about to go forward and hug Chin-shi, but Chin-shi made a shushing gesture to her. Shoo, don't let others know that Dad is Santa Claus. This is a secret. If you tell others, Dad can't be Santa Claus. Hearing this, the little girl suddenly nodded quickly like a chicken pecking at rice. I won't say. I won't say. For the little girl, there was obviously nothing more surprising than her father being Santa Claus. The little girl was so happy that she couldn't close her mouth, but her sister-in-law had a speechless expression. She never thought, Chin-shi asked her to come out and take care of Nyan, just to make a cameo appearance as Santa Claus tonight. Did he make a mistake? In fact, since the school proposed the Christmas-themed party, Chin-shi went to discuss with the teacher, hoping that he could make a cameo appearance as Santa Claus. Originally, Santa Claus was to be played by the kindergarten staff, but since there were children's parents who were willing to make a cameo appearance, the teacher naturally wouldn't reject, and so today's event happened. Of course, this secret couldn't be known by the other children, otherwise, they would be envious. This was the surprise that Chin-shi specially prepared for Nyan. From the little girl's reaction, his goal was achieved. Therefore, the first surprise that Nyan experienced in her life. Chapter 395. Since she found out that her father was Santa Claus, the little girl had been very excited. She wanted to share the joy in her heart with the two brothers, but she had scruples about Chin-shi's warning just now, so she could only hold her little face and wriggle with excitement all night. Maybe it was because Chin-shi was sitting next to her today, so when the little girl drew the Christmas card, she specially drew it for her. This is Dad. This is Mom. This is Auntie. After drawing the card, the little girl handed the card to Chin-shi as if she was presenting a treasure. When Chin Wanqing saw the little red person with a big belly on the card, the corners of her mouth couldn't help but reveal a faint smile. Wasn't this chubby Santa Chin-shi? Looking at Nyan's little face that had turned red because of happiness. Suddenly, Chin-shi seemed to finally understand Chin-shi's idea. With such a daughter, what more could a man ask for? It was said that a daughter was her father's little lover in his last life, wasn't it, because the first man in the world who saw her smile or cry was her father. The first man in the world who hugged her and kissed her was her father. The first man in the world who dared to say to her that he would always be by her side was also her father. Her father was her daughter's most firm and dependable support, and also the most affectionate and sincere man in the world to her. Only her father would care about her and love her without asking for anything in return. Her father would never be like other men. Yesterday, he kept saying that he loved you, but today, he would stab you with the sharpest knife. In short, no matter what her father did, he always had only one starting point, and that was for the good of his daughter. As for whether his daughter could feel and understand the strong father's love in it, it was obviously another matter. A father's love was like a mountain, and a mother's love was like water. The mountain was high, mighty, and magnificent. The mountain was high, and the scenery was moving. The water was good, and the flow was meticulous. It was trickling, soft, and flowing continuously. This was a Christmas full of joy and joy. After the cards were finished, the teacher asked the children to give the cards to the people they wanted to give them to the most. Some children, under the guidance of their parents, gave the cards to their teachers. Some of the children gave the cards to their parents. Only the little girl did not do so. Instead, she put the greeting card into her small school bag. The teacher noticed her unusual behavior, so he came to her side and gently asked her who she wanted to give the card to. Hearing this, the little girl stared at her with her big eyes and asked in confusion, "Teacher, didn't you say that if we give the patients a card, they will get better faster? Mom is sick. I want to give this card to my mother. That way, Mom will recover faster." After saying that, the little girl patted her school bag like a treasure. It seemed that she had high expectations for this greeting card. She had lied to her that her mother was sick, and the little girl had always kept this matter in her heart. Patients needed more care and attention. This 5-year-old child had already learned how to care for others. Qin Shuiqing fell silent. She gently stroked the little fellow's head, but didn't say a word. Because she finally understood, what exactly was his sister searching for back then? 10,000 Holy Valley was too cold. The stubborn feudal clan rules restricted her thoughts. So all along, she only had one pursuit in her heart. That was to cultivate, and cultivate again. Why cultivate? To ascend. But, wasn't ascension another form of liberation? It was only at this moment that Qin Shuiqing truly saw her own heart clearly. She seemed to be strong and decisive, but in fact, she was much weaker than Qin Ruoying. At least, her sister could violate the clan rules in order to pursue what she wanted, but she could only numb herself by cultivating day and night. Just like what she said, humans had 7 emotions and 6 desires. This was an unavoidable fact. If one extinguished their emotions and desires, would they still be human? Looking at Nyan's innocent and beautiful smile, Qin Shuiqing suddenly felt enlightened. She closed her eyes, and the vital energy in her body suddenly began to flow slowly. Under her influence, a faint breeze suddenly blew through the originally closed doors and windows of the classroom. The wind blew the paper on the picture album on the table, and also gently brushed the faces of all the children. No one noticed that something was wrong with her. This woman with exceptional talent and excellent aptitude. She actually had an epiphany just like that. At this moment, She had also changed and returned to the classroom. He noticed that Qin Shuiqing was acting strangely, so he immediately set up a restriction to ensure that her epiphany would not be disturbed by the outside world. "Dad, what's wrong with Auntie? Auntie is tired. Let her rest for a while. She'll be fine soon." "Oh. Then let's speak softly. Don't disturb Auntie. Good girl, you're sensible." His sister-in-law had an epiphany. After the Christmas party ended, she went home and shut herself in. The secular world tempered her heart, and she took it with equanimity. The world was full of disturbances, and her heart reflected the secular world. She just casually gave some advice, but he didn't expect Qin Shuiqing to understand it completely. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry about this. After all, this question was obviously beyond the scope of the syllabus. Perhaps this was what they meant by, "Flowers planted with the intention do not bloom, but willows planted without the intention do." Ever since she found the Earth Soul, Qin Shuiqing's cultivation level shot up like a rocket. Qin Ruoying had the best resources, but her cultivation progress was still like a tortoise's crawl. There was no obvious improvement at all. Everyone had their own fate. Fortunately, Qin Ruoying was not a narrow-minded person. Otherwise, she would be depressed to death if she saw this situation. December 31st. It was the last day of the year. She waited outside the west wing door, like a father waiting for his child to be born. He paced back and forth in the courtyard, slightly anxious. Suddenly, a strong wave of spirit energy surged out from the west wing. She immediately jumped into the room as if he had been electrocuted. As soon as he entered, he saw Qin Ruoying sitting cross-legged on the bed and looking at him with a yinging smile. Qin Ruoying had finally fully digested the effects of the spirit pill and officially came out of seclusion. Come, Ying, let me see if there are any side effects. As Qin spoke, she moved closer to Qin Ruoying with a bashful face. In fact, Qin Ruoying had only broken through to the diviner stage. It wasn't a forced breakthrough, so how could there be any danger? Qin was taking the opportunity to take advantage of her. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying didn't hesitate. Instead, she offered her red lips and gently pecked Qin's face. Not enough, not enough. You have to do it here too. In your dreams, not kissing. Then I'll kiss you instead. Stop fooling around. Come on, just one, he. They were obviously an old couple, but when the two of them were together, they were still as sweet as before. After a round of lovemaking, Qin Ruoying gently leaned on Qin's shoulder and then chatted with him casually. How has Nian been doing during this time? Very good. She even made you a greeting card. When is the school holiday? Around the middle of next month. So soon. Why don't we take Nian out for a trip when she's on holiday? Oh. Where do you want to go? Anywhere is fine as long as you're with me. Okay, you've worked hard during this time. I'll arrange it. When the time comes, let's go on a trip around the world as a family. How about that? The word cultivation was never the topic of conversation between husband and wife. They preferred to live in the moment and enjoy the sweet time with their family. And this should be the so-called happiness, right? Therefore, the only thing Qin wanted now was to let this happiness continue to last. No one could ruin his happy life. Chapter 396. January 3rd. After the New Year's holiday, Nian and the two brothers reluctantly returned to school. They had a great time during the holiday. The short time he spent with his son made Xia Kaiji experience a kind of happiness that he had never experienced before. Therefore, he came to the tea house every day. No matter how Gu Lao gave him a hard time, he acted like nothing had happened and followed the three children around shamelessly. No matter what the children wanted, Xia Kaiji would immediately run to buy it for them. Looking at his eagerness, people who didn't know would think that he had a mistress outside. As a father, Qin could naturally understand Xia Kaiji's feelings, so he didn't deliberately reject him. Instead, he gave him the responsibility of taking care of the children. In this regard, Xia Kaiji certainly couldn't ask for more. Therefore, he took the three children to stroll around Hohai every day. There were many people during the holiday. For safety reasons, Qin even let the big cat follow them all the way to prevent the three children from getting lost. With a young and strong nanny like Xia Kaiji, Qin immediately became free. He could finally free up some time to spend a few days with Qin Ruoying in their sweet two-person world, falling in love, getting married, having children. Each stage would give people different insights. After changing from a two-person world to a three-person world, life would become trivial and repetitive, and there would no longer be the romance when two people were together. Even if 500 years had passed, Qin was still a romantic person. So every morning, as soon as Xia Kaiji took the three children out of the tea house, Qin took Qin Ruoying to start their honeymoon trip. Just as the lyrics say, I want to take you to romantic Turkey, then go to Tokyo and Paris. Actually, I really like Miami and Los Angeles with black people. Other people traveled by walking, but Qin traveled by flying. In a short span of 3 days, he had brought Qin Ruoying around the earth once. From Asia to Europe, from North America to South America. They rode in Venice and saw the sea in the Aegean Sea. They went to Iceland to enjoy the polar scenery, and then went to Africa to experience the tropical scenery. America's Grand Canyon, Egypt's pyramids, Turkey's Cotton Island, Maldives' Sea of Stars, everyone had their own experience with traveling. And Qin's experience was, the world is so big, I only want you by my side. When Yin Yin came home every night, she would happily tell her mother where she had been, but she didn't know, when she was still squeezing around in Shangjing City, her father had already brought her mother to play all over the world. It was a happy holiday, a sweet time that only belonged to mom and dad. The little guy was still young, so he naturally didn't understand the world of adults. Perhaps out of compensation, Qinshi decisively decided, when Yin Yin turned 16, he would take her to travel around the world. She was a girl after all, so she naturally had to be pampered. The higher one's horizons were, the harder it was for them to be fooled. In this regard, Qinshi even had a malicious fantasy. When Yin Yin grew up, if a boy chased her and said that he wanted to take her on a trip, Yin Yin would respond with disdain, "Where are we going?" "The moon." "If it's not the moon, then stop, my dad has already taken me to play all over the world." Thinking of this, Qinshi's mouth couldn't help but reveal a smug smirk. He really wanted to know, under his wise guidance, who could easily trick Yin Yin away from him. "Humph. How dare you lie to Yin Yin? I'll break your leg for you." The holiday was over, and the days immediately returned to the usual peace. Qinshi seemed to be idling around all day with nothing to do, but she was secretly playing a big game of chess. The reason why he suddenly took Qin Ruoying on a trip around the world was, on one hand, to enjoy the two of them, and on the other hand, it was completely because of Wuxiu. As the saying goes, if you don't kill the snake, it will eventually be harmful. After Wuxiu escaped with serious injuries, Qinshi did think of looking for him. But in this vast sea of people, where should he go to find him? Wuxiu was like an injured poisonous snake, hiding in a dark corner of the earth, waiting for an opportunity to strike. The earth was very big. But for cultivators of their level, the earth was still too small. This feeling was like having a poisonous snake at home, but Qinshi couldn't find it no matter how hard he tried. Qinshi wasn't afraid of poisonous snakes. But Nian Nian and Ning Ying were afraid. With Wuxiu's cultivation level, other than Qinshi, who else could deal with him? It was imperative to get rid of the source of the problem. Therefore, Qinshi set up restrictions in most areas of the world. These restrictions were equivalent to radars, each covering a range and sensing the fluctuation of spirit energy in the area at all times. As long as Wuxiu attacked within the range of the restrictions, Qinshi would be able to detect his location immediately. Of course, if Wuxiu didn't attack, Qinshi wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Anyway, let's take it slow, let's see who has more patience. Needless to say, Qinshi's idea was very good. But he didn't expect this at all. Life always brings unexpected surprises to people. The weather was sunny today. The highest temperature was 6 degrees Celsius. Qinshi moved a chair to sit in the courtyard, basking in the sun while teaching Qin Ruoying his experience of condensing the core. The so-called cultivation naturally couldn't be achieved overnight. Dual cultivation and whatnot, that was something that only evil cultivators would practice. Qinshi claimed to be a good youth, so naturally, he wouldn't use this method to forcefully raise Qin Ruoying's cultivation level. It didn't matter if her aptitude was poor, as long as she cultivated slowly, there would be a day when she would break through. Ying, hold your breath and try to gather your vital essence in your energy center. Actually, the process of condensing the core is like forging iron. Only through repeated tempering and hammering can the impurities in the iron block be beaten out, thus making the treasured sword sharper and sturdier. Qinshi explained in an easy-to-understand way so that Qin Ruoying could understand more easily. After listening to his explanation, Qin Ruoying started to try to refine the primordial core in her body according to his method. The difference between the primordial core and the golden core was probably the difference between iron and steel. Only after going through a lot of tempering could iron become hard. After all, after repeated forging, it would become steel. After Qin Ruoying entered a meditative state, Qinshi set up a restriction for her, then sat beside her and observed silently. The situation was not bad. The elixir provided Qin Ruoying with enough raw materials, so the only thing she had to do now was to put all these raw materials into a furnace, then burn them repeatedly until the golden core came out. This was a very long process. Qin Shi watched for a while, and after confirming that Qin Ruoying did not go astray, he closed his eyes and started his own cultivation. However, not long after Qin Shi closed his eyes, Qin Ruoying suddenly stopped. She suddenly opened her eyes, then as if she was feeling a little uncomfortable, she subconsciously reached out and rubbed her forehead. Ying. What's wrong? Are you not feeling well? Qin Shi sensed that something was wrong with her, so he immediately jumped up from his chair and appeared directly beside Qin Ruoying, then gently pressed his hand on her back. My head is a little dizzy, do I have a fever? Qin Ruoying rubbed her head, then forced a smile at Qin Shi. What fever? You're already a diviner. How can a diviner fall sick? After saying that, Qin Shi closed his eyes and began to sense if there was a spirit energy tied in some corner of the earth. However, after searching for a while, he did not find any signs of a spirit energy tied. It was as if the entire earth had fallen asleep. It was quiet and peaceful. Qin Shi was a little confused. However, just as he was feeling very confused, Qin Ruoying suddenly closed her eyes and fainted beside him. Chapter 397. The moment Qin Ruoying fainted, Qin Shi was completely stunned. He subconsciously reached out to support Qin Ruoying, but at the same time, he looked up at the sky. It was winter at the moment, but the sky in Shangjing City was blue and white, clear and boundless. The warm winter sun emitted a warm golden light. It should have been a leisurely and comfortable afternoon, but a trace of coldness gradually rose from the bottom of his heart. He picked up Qin Ruoying by the waist and looked at his lover leaning unconsciously on his shoulder. At this moment, his mind was completely blank. Why? Why exactly? Where did the spirit energy tide appear? Why didn't he notice any abnormalities? Qin Shi gently placed Qin Ruoying on the bed. Then, he sat cross-legged next to his lover. Without any hesitation, he directly took out the soul crystal, and then used the amplification effect of the soul crystal to greatly enhance the strength of his divine soul. At the same time, the restrictions that Qin Shi had set up all over the world seemed to have been stimulated by something. They suddenly expanded a lot, and the area they covered almost doubled. One after another, the perceptual restrictions were like a big net that covered the sky. The moment the big net opened, Qin Shi's consciousness also spread out. In his perception, the whole world was quiet, so calm that there was not a trace of ripple. Qin Shi did not believe it, so he mobilized his divine soul with all his strength, trying to bring the whole earth into his perception range. However, how big was the earth? The 7 continents only occupied 29% of the area, and the remaining 71% was all ocean. Qin Shi was already struggling to perceive the 29% of the land, so how could he forcibly perceive the rest of the ocean? This was not a battle, and it had nothing to do with the accumulation of true essence. It was purely relying on the perception of the divine soul. This level of consumption had completely exceeded the limit of what he could bear. Therefore, after holding on for a few minutes, Qin Shi's 7 orifices began to strangely bleed. Fortunately, Nian Nian was not at home at the moment. Otherwise, wouldn't she be frightened by his current appearance? Qin Shi gritted his teeth and persevered for a long time. In the end, because his spirit was unable to bear the burden, he had no choice but to stop this dangerous action. There was no sign of the tide surging, but Qin Ruoying still fainted because of dizziness. No matter how slow-witted Qin Shi was, he should have figured out the reason by now. It turned out that he had been looking in the wrong direction. Previously, whenever Qin Ruoying felt dizzy, it must be when the tide was surging and the gate of heaven was about to open. This also made Qin Shi fall into a misunderstanding, thinking that Yingying's illness was related to all of this. In fact, the spirit chi tide was a blessing given to cultivators by the heavens. How could it bring bad effects to people? The crux of the problem was not because of the spirit energy tide, but because, sky-bearing art, floating dawn mirror. Every time the tide surged, the people behind the heavenly gate would take out the heaven-bearing efficacious floating mirror. Although he was not clear about the true use of this treasure, there was no doubt that, once Qiandu used the sky-bearing art, Xian Nu, who was in the lower realm, would definitely be affected. Xian Nu, Xian Nu. The names sounded good, but in reality, they were just a bunch of pitiful cannon fodder. After thinking through this point, Chen Shi stopped all of his meaningless actions and quietly sat beside Qin Ruoying. He quietly looked at his lover's face, hoping that the first thing she saw when she woke up would be him. Unfortunately, Qin Ruoying did not wake up. It was as if she was asleep. Her breathing was slightly weak, but the frequency was orderly. Chen Shi waited silently. But this time, Qin Ruoying was unconscious for a much longer time than the last time. As the light in the room dimmed bit by bit, it meant that the sun was about to set. Ring, ring, ring. Suddenly, a melodious ringtone sounded. It was Chen Shi's cell phone. At this moment, as if he had just woken up from a dream, he suddenly realized, Nian Nian was out of school. As expected, the moment Chen Shi picked up the phone, the little fellow's sweet voice sounded from the other end of the phone. Daddy, where are you? We're out of school. Daddy was delayed by something. I'll come pick you up now. Wait for Daddy for one more minute, okay? Okay. After hanging up the phone, Chen Shi lowered his head to look at his lover who was still in a deep sleep. After gently kissing her forehead, Chen Shi's figure suddenly disappeared from the room. When he appeared again, he was already outside the school gate. Daddy! 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 Daddy is here to pick me up. Goodbye, teacher. As usual, the moment the little fellow saw Chen Shi, she immediately raised her little hand, stepped forward, and ran towards him excitedly. After Chen Shi picked up the little fellow from the ground, the two brothers who had been following the little fellow finally relaxed and waved goodbye to the little fellow reluctantly. The two of them were now picked up by Xia Kaiji's car every day. Naturally, they did not have to trouble Chen Shi every day. Daddy! Teacher taught us how to sing today. What song? Two tigers. After saying that, the little fellow grinned very proudly. If it was in the past, Chen Shi would definitely accompany her to sing all the way home. However, to the little fellow's disappointment, Chen Shi just nodded casually today, and then there was nothing else. Seeing this, the little fellow was obviously a little unhappy. Just as she was about to flare up, the little fellow suddenly seemed to have thought of something, so she immediately shut her little mouth and quietly lay on Chen Shi's shoulder. The teacher said, everyone has a time when they are in a bad mood, even Daddy and Mommy are no exception. Daddy is in a bad mood today, so I won't disturb Daddy. Nian Nian is very sensible. The father and daughter quickly returned home without saying anything. At this time, the little fellow finally knew why Daddy was in a bad mood. Mommy is sick again. Looking at Mommy lying on the bed, the little fellow followed Daddy's usual behavior and carefully covered Mommy with the quilt. After that, the little fellow stopped making a fuss. After eating her dinner obediently, she started to watch cartoons in silence. While watching cartoons, the little fellow would still look back at Daddy and Mommy from time to time. Daddy had been silently staying by Mommy's bedside. Although the cartoon characters on the TV kept making noises, there was a strange silence in the room from beginning to end. Time passed by, and soon it was time for the little fellow to sleep. She was sleepy. However, she did not call Daddy. Instead, she ran to the bathroom, then brought a small stool and tiptoed to turn on the tap. The sudden sound of running water startled Chen Shi. At this time, he finally realized that he had neglected Nyan, so he quickly got up to help the little fellow wash up. After washing up, Chin-shi carried her to the bed. The little girl laid down on the bed by herself, and then slipped into the warm blanket like a wisp of smoke. The little fellow covered half of her face with the quilt, only revealing a pair of bright big eyes. Then, she used her big eyes to look at Mommy who was sleeping soundly beside her, then looked at Daddy who was beside her with a cloud of worry. At that moment, the little fellow seemed to have suddenly grown up. She actually hid in the quilt and comforted him in a muffled voice, "Daddy, don't be sad. Mommy will get better." The moment he heard this sentence, Chin-shi's nose twitched, and an indescribable feeling surged in his heart. "Good girl, go to sleep. Daddy knows Mommy will get better. When Mommy gets better, Daddy will take you on a trip, okay?" "Okay." After hearing Chin-shi's words, the little fellow's face suddenly revealed a smile. Then, she suddenly sat up from the bed, leaned over and kissed Chin-shi's face heavily, then obediently lay back down. "Muah. Good night, Daddy. I'm going to sleep." Chapter 398. The little fellow was sensible. In addition to knowing not to cause trouble for Dad, she even learned how to comfort Dad. Therefore, after Nyan entered that sweet dreamland, Chin-shi let out a soft sigh in this dark room. "Dad, don't be sad, Mom will get better." The little fellow had already fallen asleep, but her words kept echoing in Chin-shi's ears. Chin-shi silently savored this sentence. After a long time, he was like the prince who kissed Snow White in the fairy tale, kissing the little fellow and Chin Roying's face one by one, then got up and left the room. As soon as he opened the door, a cold wind mixed with snowflakes suddenly hit his face. It started to snow in Shangjing City again. Chin-shi withdrew his vital essence, allowing the cold wind to wantonly enter his sleeves, and silently felt the chill brought by the cold wind. The whole sky was dark. There was only a little bit of weak moonlight, which seemed so cold. Chin-shi set up a restriction in the room, so that he could know the situation of Chin Roying at the first moment. Then, he flew directly into the dark night sky. He flew very fast, and in the blink of an eye, he had already flown out of Huaxia and arrived above the Pacific Ocean. And the destination of his trip, obviously, it was the waterless cave located in the deep sea. Deep in the cave, Bai Hong and Qing Wan were still like suffering Jesus, hanging high above the cave by Chin-shi. Chin-shi didn't want to kill indiscriminately, so he kept them here. Because of the suppression of the spirit needles and spirit-piercing needles, the injuries of the two people did not get any treatment, but worsened a lot, so they looked very bad. Being in prison was actually a very terrifying thing, especially this kind of cage that was similar to a small dark room. Unable to see the sun, unable to communicate with people, in this cramped and oppressive space, the most frightening and tormenting thing was actually loneliness. Qing Wan's injuries were more serious, so she could only be awake for about 2 or 3 hours a day, and at other times, she was in a self-protective coma. Chin-shi came at the right time today, just when Qing Wan was awake. Bai Hong and Qing Wan were talking in a low voice. As soon as they heard the movement caused by Chin-shi flying out of the cold pool, a trace of fear flashed across their faces. Yes, Divine General Tiandu was also afraid. After a long period of confinement, they had developed a fear of Chin-shi. They were not afraid of death, but they were afraid of this endless loneliness. Come. Kill me. Kill me. The moment Chin-shi appeared, Qing Wan was like an enraged beast, crazily roaring at Chin-shi. As he roared, he spat at Chin-shi in an attempt to infuriate Chin-shi so that she would kill him. Do you want to die so much? Then I to you, Qing to Tiandu to Tiandu to be to kill to Tiandu to die to be killed. Then, a stream of qi like a heavy hammer smashed into Qing Wan's chest. Qing Wan was already injured, and after suffering such a heavy blow, she immediately spat out a large mouthful of blood. She could only hang her head weakly, and it seemed that she had lost half of her life. Stop. You're going to kill him like this. Seeing this, Bai Hong could not help but be anxious. Although she also had the idea of dying early and being free, it was just a thought. Even ants craved for life, not to mention them, the divine generals. Bai Hong did not want to die, and was even more unwilling to see Qing Wan die in front of her. Chen Shi would not come for no reason. Today, he suddenly came, there must be something to ask. Therefore, after a strong struggle in her mind, Bai Hong asked in a tone that was close to begging for mercy, "What do you want to know?" "As long as it does not involve the core of Tiandu, I can tell you without reservation." "Is that so?" Hearing this, Chen Shi smiled with satisfaction. But that smile, it looked a little cold. "I want to know everything about the sky-bearing technique and floating dawn mirror, can you tell me?" As he spoke, Chen Shi slowly rose from the ground, and then flew straight to Qing Wan. He was obviously talking to Bai Hong, but he used his qi to lift Qing Wan's head, and began to size up this poor divine general who was covered in wounds. Bai Hong of course understood what Chen Shi meant. If she kept silent, Chen Shi would obviously use the soul-sucking technique on Qing Wan. Seeing this, Bai Hong replied rather straightforwardly, "Sky-bearing technique and floating dawn mirror." "No problem, I can tell you, that is the treasure left behind by the divine ancestor, we now call it, soul mirror." Soul mirror. Chen Shi repeated this name, then frowned and asked, "What is its use?" Hearing this, Bai Hong immediately answered honestly, "The 5 great temples and the 13 soul-gathering cauldrons are all related to the soul mirror. Simply put, you can see it as the key to open the gate of heaven. Don't blame me for not telling you. Although the soul mirror is a treasure, it has no practical use. Apart from when it is needed to open the gate of heaven, it can only be placed in the imperial hall as a decoration." Bai Hong thought that Chen Shi was after the divine ancestor's treasure, so she couldn't help but remind him. However, after hearing this, Chen Shi continued to ask, "If I were to ascend from the lower realm and enter the gate of heaven, where would I appear? Where is the imperial hall? Who is usually in charge of the soul mirror? What is this person's cultivation? Are there any other defensive arrangements around it?" Bai Hong was stunned by Chen Shi's series of questions. He stared blankly at Chen Shi for a long while before saying in shock, "You're actually thinking about the soul mirror?" Chen Shi roared impatiently, "Answer my question." Bai Hong was really scared. Looking at Chen Shi's attitude, he really wanted to go to the Imperial Hall to snatch the soul mirror. What kind of place was the Imperial Hall? That was the core of the divine capital, equivalent to the Emperor's throne room. Are you crazy? Bai Hong looked at Chen Shi speechlessly. At this moment, Chen Shi looked like a bloodthirsty gambler. Seeing that Bai Hong was unwilling to answer, he actually pressed his hand on Qing Wan's head and used the soul-snatching technique. In fact, the soul-snatching technique was not as exaggerated as Chen Shi had said before. This technique had a lot of restrictions. After using it, one could only inquire about some insignificant surface information. If it involved important secrets, the target's soul would automatically hide it, making the caster unable to pry. Since Qing Wan was a divine general of the divine capital, he obviously had a detailed understanding of the layout of the Imperial Hall. To Qing Wan, the Imperial Hall was no secret at all. Naturally, it would not be deliberately protected by his soul. Chapter 399. He saw, the moment Chen Shi pressed his palm on Qing Wan's head, Qing Wan seemed to have been electrocuted. Her body twitched violently in the unconscious state. Bai Hong was stunned. He never thought that Chen Shi would actually really deal such a vicious blow to Qing Wan. Stop! At that instant, Bai Hong's eyes were about to split. However, due to the suppression of the soul-setting needle, he could only watch as the Azure One was tortured. Bai Hong struggled with all her might, her eyes flashing with uncontrollable anger. He gnashed his teeth so hard that they creaked, and he looked like a ferocious beast that had lost all reason due to rage. He wished for nothing more than to pounce forward and tear Qin-shi into pieces. But unfortunately, this was just Bai Hong's wishful thinking. Qin-shi was like a cold robot. He completely ignored the pain and anger in his heart and searched for all the information in Cyan Phoenix's mind. Since it was a forced soul search, this secret technique would naturally put a huge burden on the target's divine soul. Therefore, it didn't take long before blood began to seep out of the 7 orifices of the green phoenix, just like when Qin-shi forcibly perceived the entire world. Bai Hong stared blankly as everything unfolded. He didn't understand the soul-snatching secret technique and thought that what Qin-shi had said to scare him was true. Bai Hong could accept that Qin-shi had directly killed Qing Yuan because their skills were not as good as his. But he couldn't accept it. Qin-shi used this method to torture Qing Yuan. Absolutely not. I'm going to kill you. I'll kill you. Ha. Anger gives strength, as long as it is not mixed with the hesitation and apprehension of the weak. It was precisely because of this, Bai Hong, who was already on the verge of death, actually burst out with an extremely strong true essence fluctuation from his body. This surge of true essence was too ferocious, and it actually shook off the golden needles that Qin-shi had inserted into his body one by one. Qin-shi didn't even have time to withdraw the secret method from Qing Yuan's body before Bai Hong rushed towards him like a tiger that had just escaped from its cage. Die! Bai Hong's face was strangely flushed. As soon as he broke free, his body constantly emitted a strong true essence fluctuation. Bai Hong's current state was very strange. He was clearly wounded all over, and there was barely a tenth of the Jin Yuan left in his body, but he was still able to release Jin Yuan fluctuations that were far stronger than when he was at his peak. Before it could attack, the true essence slammed into the wall again and again, causing the entire cave to tremble violently. After Bai Hong let out a roar, he immediately waved his right hand and slapped Qin-shi's head fiercely. At this time, Qin-shi, who sensed the abnormality, hurriedly withdrew his secret technique and took Bai Hong's palm strike head-on. Bang! In an instant, there was a violent explosion in the cave. Qin-shi was actually forced to retreat more than 10 meters. Are you crazy? Looking at this divine general of Tiandu who was on the verge of going crazy, it was Qin-shi's turn to be surprised. Bai Hong is burning his own yuanying. Yuanying was the result of a cultivator's painstaking cultivation, and it was also the foundation of their abilities. Even if they died, as long as their yuanying was not extinguished, a cultivator would still have a chance to be reborn. Therefore, for a cultivator, yuanying represented everything, even more important than life. Burning yuanying meant giving up everything that he had worked so hard for hundreds or even thousands of years. This kind of damage was irreversible. Once his yuanying was burned out, even if Bai Hong was lucky enough to survive today, he would not be able to cultivate from now on, and for a cultivator, what was the difference between this and death? Bai Hong simply wanted to fight to the death with Qin-shi, not stopping until one of them was dead. Seeing this, Qin-shi finally calmed down. After taking a deep look at Bai Hong, he asked in a slightly strange tone, burning yuanying. Since you're so desperate, then I admit defeat, okay? Actually, I didn't want to kill you. This secret technique won't harm your life, it's just to scare you. How about this, let's talk nicely. Admit defeat. Hearing this, Bai Hong could not help but be stunned. But after thinking about it, he thought that Qin-shi was deliberately stalling for time, so he immediately attacked Qin-shi again. Seeing this, Qin-shi uncharacteristically turned around and ran. He had no intention of fighting with Bai Hong at all. Trying to be a hero depended on the situation. Since Bai Hong had already burned his yuanying, Qin-shi only needed to temporarily avoid the attack. After half an hour, Bai Hong would probably collapse because of his yuanying. Bai Hong clearly knew this, so he wanted to fight to the death with Qin Shi before his yuanying burned out. But what he did not expect was, Qin Shi was running faster than a rabbit at this moment. His cultivation level was much higher than Bai Hong's. Now that he was determined to run, how could Bai Hong easily catch up to him? Thus, the two of them began a game of cat and mouse in the deep sea. Qin Shi was like walking a dog on an electric scooter. From time to time, he would turn around and send a voice transmission to Bai Hong. Calm down, let's talk nicely. If you stop now, you should still be saved. You saw it too. If I'm determined to run, you won't be able to catch me at all. I advise you not to be so stubborn. When the nascent soul is burned up, I will be able to decide whether I want to kill him or not. I see that you're a man. I don't want to take your life, so I advise you. Under Qin Shi's constant persuasion, Bai Hong finally stopped. He could not catch up, and he could not beat him. What else could he do? He was also very desperate. The two confronted each other across the trench. After a long while. Only then did Bai Hong say in a deep voice, I only have one request. If you agree, you can kill me or cut me up as you wish in the future. If not, I can only fight to the death with you. In this regard, Qin Shi was very magnanimous, so he responded readily, okay, say it. Don't use such despicable means again, or I won't let you go even if I become a ghost. Qin Shi naturally did not take Bai Hong's threat to heart. However, he still gave Bai Hong a definite answer. I can promise you, but there's a condition. You must make a heart demon oath and promise that you won't hide anything from me. You must answer all the questions I ask you in full detail. If you hide anything, you will be swallowed by the oath. Hearing this, Bai Hong did not immediately answer. Instead, his eyes flickered, and no one knew what he was thinking. Of course, Qin Shi knew what he was thinking, so he immediately added, Don't worry, I have no interest in going against Tiandu. The reason why I want the soul mirror is entirely because of my wife. She is the arbiter of fate Xian Nu, so, do you understand? After hearing Qin Shi's words, Bai Hong's expression softened. Because of the arbiter of fate Xian Nu. So that's why. Bai Hong thought seriously for a while, and after receiving Qin Shi's repeated assurances, he finally stopped his suicidal behavior. Although the yuanying had not yet burned out, it had caused extremely serious damage that was almost irreversible. Therefore, the moment Bai Hong removed his inner yuan, he seemed to have aged many years, and his appearance changed from that of a young man in his 20s to that of a middle-aged man in his 40s. When Qin Shi saw his sickly appearance and that even flying was a problem, he kindly helped him stabilize his injuries and flew him back to the cave. On the way back, Bai Hong seemed to have finally figured something out, and he suddenly turned to Qin Shi and said, You have the strength of a celestial venerable. Yindu shouldn't make an enemy of you for no reason. Since everything you've done is for your wife, I can tell you where the soul mirror is. I only hope that you can keep your promise. Hearing this, Qin Shi was overjoyed, and he hurriedly asked, No problem. As long as you can cure my wife, everything is negotiable. If nothing unexpected happens, the soul mirror should still be in my junior brother's hands. Your junior brother. Where is he? Did he come down with you? When we came, junior brother was still cultivating with master. Now that we haven't returned to Tiandu yet, I'm sure master will personally come down to check. When that time comes, junior brother might come with him. Alright, what's your junior brother's name? I'll make a note of it so that I can find him in the future. He's called Wushu. What? Wushu. The moment she heard this name, Qin Shi's entire body felt unwell. Chapter 400. Even if Bai Hong burned his yuanying, he was still no match for Qin Shi. Qin Shi avoided him because he did not want to waste his energy. After all, if he could solve the problem peacefully, why would he need to resort to violence? The result was, of course, a happy ending. Bai Hong's life was saved, and Qin Shi also got the answer he wanted. However, the moment he got the answer, Qinshi did not feel good. The sky-bearing technique and floating dawn mirror was actually in Wushu's hands. If he had known this would happen, Qinshi would have left Wushu on Daiyu Island even if he burned his yuaning that day. Unfortunately, there were no ifs. Wushu had already escaped, and at this moment, he might be hiding in some dark corner of the earth, laughing secretly. Now that things had come to this, Qinshi's regret was useless. Therefore, he could only hope that he could successfully find Wushu and get the soul mirror from him. Since Ying's illness was related to the soul mirror, he had to get the soul mirror no matter what method he used. For this reason, Qinshi even had the dangerous idea of fighting his way to Tiandu. In fact, Qinshi did not want to be enemies with anyone. Just like what he taught Nian on a daily basis, we do not cause trouble, but we are definitely not afraid of trouble. And this was also his daily principle. I avoided it only because I had a family. I did not want my family to take any unknown risks. The money, status, and power of the mortal world were meaningless to Qinshi. Similarly, the rare treasures, cultivation techniques, and elixirs of the cultivation world were also dispensable to Qinshi. After all, with Nian and Ying, he already had the whole world. Why should he care about these worldly possessions? Qinshi wanted to avoid the world. Not escape, but avoid. Avoid all unnecessary trouble. But unfortunately, avoiding was not the way to solve the problem. Since the problem had already appeared, Qinshi could only think of a way to solve it. Fighting was not the only way to solve the problem. If it wasn't necessary, Qinshi wasn't willing to make enemies everywhere. Therefore, he tried to communicate with Bai Hong, hoping to find another way to solve this problem from Bai Hong. Otherwise, Qinshi might really have to fight all the way from the Heavenly Gate to the Imperial Extreme Hall. Bai Hong understood the situation. When he learned of Qinshi's motives, he no longer tried to obstruct him. On the contrary, he hoped that Qinshi could smoothly obtain the soul mirror and thus resolve the illness plaguing Qin Ruoying, thereby forming a good relationship with Heaven Capital. Didn't Bai Hong resent Qinshi? Obviously, it was impossible. However, he had no choice but to lower his head under the eaves. Churchill once said, "There are no eternal friends in this world, nor are there eternal enemies, only eternal interests." Since the two of them had reached a preliminary consensus, the next priority was, obviously, he wanted to find Wushu. But in this vast sea of people, where should he go to find her? For this reason, after a serious discussion between Qinshi and Bai Hong, they finally found a more reliable method. That was, Bai Hong appeared and used divine telekinesis to lure Wushu out. It was equivalent to humans sending signals to space to search for aliens. Qinshi circled the world with Bai Hong, and Bai Hong continuously released divine telekinesis to lure Wushu out. No matter what, the two of them were fellow disciples and had a close relationship. With Bai Hong as a guarantor, Wushu should be able to boldly show up. This method had a certain degree of feasibility. Therefore, Bai Hong and Qing Wan temporarily broke away from their prisoner status and became Qinshi's friends. Naturally, he couldn't treat his friends too badly. Therefore, Qinshi brought Bai Hong and Qing Wan to Kongju district and temporarily settled them here. For safety reasons, Qinshi didn't remove the seal in Qing Wan's body. He only relieved her internal injuries and gave her the right to move freely. After that, Qinshi began to tour the world with Bai Hong overnight. Bai Hong's divine telekinesis range was limited, so she could only release it bit by bit. The whole process was like a salesperson sweeping the floor. She needed to go door to door to hand out business cards. This was a very long process. Qinshi roughly calculated the time. Even if he flew with Bai Hong, it would take at least 3 months for Bai Hong to use divine telekinesis to sweep the world. 3 months, so be it. It was much better than being at a loss for what to do. Therefore, for the next period of time, Chen-shi still sent the little girl to and from school on time during the day and took care of her daily life. At night, after the little girl fell asleep, he would start to tour the world with Bai Hong. During this period, Bai Hong was very cooperative and didn't play any tricks the whole time. But Chen-shi's mood was getting heavier and heavier day by day. Because Qin Ruoying had not woken up. Ying-ying's coma time was far beyond Chen-shi's imagination. Her breathing didn't stop, and the vital essence in her body was still circulating on its own. Everything was normal, but she couldn't wake up and look like a vegetable. Bai Hong had never seen such a situation. He didn't know much about the Siming Xian Nu, so he could only persuade Chen-shi not to worry too much. As long as they found the soul mirror, everything would naturally be solved. Both of them placed their hopes on Wushu. But they didn't know, Bai Hong's divine telekinesis had already attracted the attention of Jiang Yan and the others. This kind of indiscriminate divine telekinesis coverage was definitely undetectable by ordinary people. But in the eyes of Jiang Yan and the others, this was equivalent to holding a loudspeaker and shouting at the entrance of a village all day long, "Wushu, Wushu, where are you? Come out, I have something to talk to you about." Because of this, Jiang Yan even pretended to call Chen-shi to ask. Although they were allies, Chen-shi was still wary of this old man, so he didn't tell him the truth. He only said that he wanted to find Wushu to prevent future trouble. Jiang Yan naturally didn't believe Chen-shi's excuse. Therefore, this old man continued to follow Chen-shi for a long time and accurately guessed Chen-shi's true purpose. For Jiang Yan, Chen-shi was a great help in overturning Tiandu, so he naturally couldn't let this help become a hindrance. So, Jiang Yan began to act. No one had ever noticed this mysterious organization. It was called the 9 Serenities. There were 9 heavens in the sky and 9 layers of earth. There was Tiandu above and the 9 Serenities below. Ever since the divine ancestor led the generals of Tiandu to ascend to the great world, the sinners left behind in the lower realm were full of hatred and formed this mysterious organization. Compared to Tiandu, its strength was too insignificant. After all, they could only watch the spiritual qi dry up and witness the arrival of the end of the world. They used to be high and mighty cultivators, but now they were like maggots in the gutter. Even becoming a diviner required a great opportunity. They could be as humble as dust, but they couldn't be as twisted as maggots. The resentment that had accumulated for thousands of years, it wasn't until the emergence of the first spiritual qi tide that they finally had the opportunity to release it. The generals of Tiandu didn't even know that there was such a reactionary organization in the lower realm. But the people of the 9 Serenities had already made an oath. They only lived to overturn Tiandu and avenge the suffering of thousands of years of repression. The 9 Serenities had begun to plan a long time ago. In addition to constantly sending people to Tiandu as spies, the rest of the people were silently waiting for the opportunity. For this reason, they would rather endure hundreds or even thousands of years of loneliness and torture, just to wait for the right time. Now the time had come, and they only lacked the opportunity to blow the horn. And Chen-shi. Chapter 401. This was an era where there were no secrets. But the existence of the 9 Serenities had never been known to outsiders. After tens of thousands of years of dormancy and management, the power of the 9 Serenities had far exceeded everyone's imagination. They were like an invisible net, firmly grasping the entire earth in the palm of their hand. Whether it was the Huaxia or other countries, from the nobles to the lowly peddlers, no one could escape the control of the 9 Serenities. It was a very simple principle. Even the Rothschild family could exist for hundreds of years, let alone a super-large organization composed of immortal cultivators like the 9 Serenities. Zhuangzi once said, "Summer insects cannot speak of ice, and children cannot speak of the sea." For immortal cultivators, fame and fortune in the eyes of mortals were meaningless. The only purpose of their existence was to one day completely overturn Tiandu and establish a new dynasty of their own, the 9 serenities. As the spiritual energy of heaven and earth declined day by day, the celestial being almost became a threshold for cultivation. But the inheritance of the 9 serenities was passed down generation after generation. They hid behind the scenes, providing unimaginable help to mortals, and indirectly controlling one dynasty after another in the world. Whether it was the Xia Empire in the east, or the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, or the Macedonian Empire in the west, the 9 serenities never interfered with the rise and fall of human dynasties, but they always put down their chess pieces when necessary. After all, compared to the high and mighty Tiandu, the 9 serenities were too weak. They had to make use of all the resources available to them in order to fight a battle with Tiandu with a great disparity in strength. The winner could have everything. Just like when the Taiqing divine ancestor led everyone to the great world and enjoyed the entire great world alone. The sinners who stayed in the lower realm could only suffer the depletion of spiritual energy and watch their inheritance deteriorate with each generation. That feeling, just like how human civilization degenerated from the universal era to the primitive era, how could the primitive people who stayed on Earth not hold a great grudge against Tiandu? The 9 serenities was a super-large tribe formed by these primitive people. Although the divine ancestor had kindly left the divine gate and gave the descendants of the sinners a chance to ascend. However, the old man seemed to have not thought of a problem at all, and that was, if the descendants of these sinners were able to cultivate to the celestial realm in such simple conditions in the lower realm, then if they were born in the great world, how could their cultivation base stop at the celestial realm? Think about it from another perspective. I spent my entire life cultivating in the lower realm, and it took me 200 years to finally break through to the Deva realm. But when he came to Tiandu, he found that a young man in his 20s or 30s could easily become a celestial. How would the sinners of the lower bound, who had cultivated their entire lives, feel? That was how resentment was born. They could be as humble as dust, but they could not be as twisted as maggots. Such an unfair encounter had already distorted the mentality of the people of the 9 serenities. Finally, the resentment that had accumulated in their hearts for tens of thousands of years was completely ignited with the appearance of the spirit energy tide. With the recovery of spirit qi, the human world will prosper. The 9 serenities would never allow Tiandu to return to the lower realm. Because the lower realm belonged to them. It was precisely because of this, at the same time that Qin Shi led Baihong to search for Wushu, the 9 serenities led by Jiang Yan also began to move. They did not have a soul as powerful as Qin Shi's, but they used a more effective method, which was face recognition. As long as there were cameras and internet coverage, there was no way to escape the detection of a supercomputer. Wushu might not have thought that there would be so many people in the world looking for him. After this period of recuperation, his injuries had more or less healed. However, for safety reasons, Wushu had never left the Arctic Circle. In addition to his daily cultivation and recuperation, this guy would lie on the iceberg, fishing and playing with polar bears. His days were quite comfortable. On this day, January 20th, it had been a full 3 months since they had escaped with the Wushu blood escape. If compared to the time in Tiandu, it was equivalent to 24 months, which was 2 years. Everything was relative, including time. The flow of time in the great world was different from that in the lower realm. 1 year on earth was 8 years in heaven. And this was the fundamental reason why the flow of time in the Guyo temple was 8 times slower than the outside world. The 5 temples were directly connected to Tiandu, so the flow of time in the temples was not Earth's time, but Tiandu's time. Chen Shi used the Guyo temple as a cultivation place before, but he did not figure out the key point. In addition, it was also because of the time difference between the 2 realms that divine generals of Tiandu were generally unwilling to come to the lower realm. Take Wushu for example, he had only been in the lower realm for 3 months, but 2 years had passed in heaven. What did 2 years mean? Divine generals who were about the same cultivation level as Wushu had probably surpassed him by now. Sailing against the current, one would fall behind if they did not advance. How could Wushu not be depressed? Not only did Qin Shi destroy the 5 temples, but he also King dispersed the spirit energy tide immediately. Without the support of the spirit energy tide, the divine gate could not be opened at all. He had a home, but he could not go back. Therefore, Wushu was as depressed as he could be at this moment. When he thought about how he had wasted 2 years in the lower realm, Wushu's mood became particularly bad. He was not in the mood to continue cultivating, so he got up and flew out, ready to stroll around and relax. For safety reasons, Wushu did not fly too far, but came to a human city closest to the North Pole, Longyern City. There was the northernmost bank in the world, the northernmost church in the world, and even a university in the northernmost part of the world. There were about 1,800 people in the town. Because of the polar night, the entire town would be in darkness from November to January every year, and there was not a trace of sunlight at all. The sky here was dark green, and the cold wind was bone-chilling, but the houses were colorful. Because the 3-month-long night made this small town the most romantic place in the world. Wushu soon arrived at Longyern City. As soon as he walked into the town, he was deeply fascinated by the colorful houses and the colorful neon lights in front of him. Therefore, Wushu walked directly into the bar with the most people almost without any hesitation. In terms of combat power, ordinary people were no different from ants in the eyes of immortal cultivators. But in terms of playfulness, 10,000 immortal cultivators might not be as good as one ordinary person. Maybe because he had been lonely for a long time, when Wushu came to such a lively place, he could not help but be affected by the atmosphere in the bar. Therefore, he did not even think about it, and directly removed the breath concealment technique, then sat at the bar like an ordinary customer and drank leisurely. From beginning to end, he did not realize that the thing that kept flashing red on the bar was called Chapter 402. There was no day in Longyern City, only 24 hours of night. This was a pure land located in the far north, the only city in the world where death was illegal. But today, this pure land was destined to be dyed red with blood. Under the long polar night, Longyern City was filled with a romantic atmosphere. This was the best time for the town's bar business. The bar music was turned up to the maximum, almost deafening people's ears. Tourists from all over the world were affected by the atmosphere and started to dance crazily on the dance floor. The air was filled with the smell of hormones. A coldly dressed woman mixed in with the crowd of men, laughing and joking. She used flirtatious words to tease the men who couldn't control themselves. When the man wanted to take a step further, the woman was like a slippery loach, running to another target. The woman shuttled back and forth in the crowd. Suddenly, she saw the Asian man sitting by the bar. This man was very strange. He was only wearing a strange long robe and a thin layer of clothing. The woman guessed which country's traditional clothing was from, and her interest was piqued little by little. Since he was used to eating Western food, it would be a good experience to change his tastes once in a while. The woman treated this man as her prey tonight, and sat directly next to him. There were no blondes in Tindu. Therefore, Wushu couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly when he sensed the woman approaching him. Interesting. Even though they didn't speak the same language, the woman's ambiguous aura floated into Wushu's eyes. If it was in the past, Wushu definitely wouldn't have any interest in this kind of ant-like existence. But today was different, he was here to relax. Therefore, Wushu imitated the others and pulled the woman into his arms. The woman smiled proudly, as if she was very satisfied with her charm. However, just as the woman was about to offer her red lips and have a beautiful encounter with this mysterious Asian man, Wushu's figure mysteriously disappeared from her side. The woman was stunned for a few seconds before she let out a heart-wrenching scream. At the same time, Wushu's figure suddenly appeared above the town. It was snowing heavily outside the house, and the cold wind was bone-chilling. The visibility was less than 10 meters, but Wushu's line of sight was firmly fixed on the southeast direction. There was an extremely powerful Jin Yuan fluctuation at that location, and Wushu also sensed a trace of hostility from this wave. It was obvious that they were here for him. Seeing this, Wushu did not cower. Instead, he flew towards that direction. This was a huge iceberg that had not melted for 10,000 years. It floated on the Arctic Ocean, moving slowly with the waves. Before Wushu got close, he saw a man standing on the peak of the ice mountain with his hands behind his back. Because they had already fought before, the moment Wushu saw Jiang Yan, he couldn't help but reveal a trace of surprise. This old thief, could it be that he was tired of living and came here to seek death? While thinking, Wushu landed on the ice mountain. At this moment, Jiang Yan slowly turned around and smiled at him. "Divine General Wushu, I haven't seen you in a long time. I've missed you." When Wushu heard this, a trace of disdain appeared on his face. He first looked around and after confirming that Qinshi was not nearby, he said coldly, "I haven't even thought of looking for you, and you're already in a hurry to die." "Die? No, no, no." Jiang Yan shook his head and smiled. "Divine General, you don't know this, but I cherish my life very much. It wasn't easy for me to live for 1,000 years, so how could I give up my life so easily?" Wushu did not immediately reply because he had already noticed that something was amiss. Jiang Yan's current state was completely different from last time. Just look at how confident he is. Even if Wushu used his but to think, he knew that if he did not have a certain amount of confidence, Jiang Yan would definitely not come all the way here to die. Wushu was confident, but he was not arrogant. Last time, Wushu was forced to use the blood escape technique by Qinshi, and he had already suffered a great loss. Therefore, he would not allow himself to fail again. Fighting because of personal feelings was something that only children would do. Therefore, when Wushu saw how confident Jiang Yan was, he immediately wanted to retreat. At this moment, Wushu was very similar to Sima Yi, who was scared off by Zhuge Liang's empty city strategy. Regardless of what Jiang Yan was planning, there was still a long way to go. This debt, he would slowly settle it in the future. After figuring this out, Wushu didn't even say a single word. Instead, he turned into a streak of light and flew toward the horizon. However, at this moment, a golden barrier suddenly appeared in the air. This barrier was like a fishing net, directly trapping Wushu in it. Then, Jiang Yan's sinister laughter sounded again. "Divine General Wushu, where are you going?" Yuanying was not easy to kill. This was something that all immortal cultivators knew. Unless one's cultivation level was suppressed, if the other party was determined to escape, it was actually very difficult to catch them. This was also the reason why Wushu was able to escape from under Qinshi's nose. Wushu had already escaped once. Jiang Yan knew that Wushu had the blood escape secret technique, so he went back to the floating mist mountain to prepare. He brought the 9 Serenities' 10,000 years of savings with him just to win the first battle. Wushu should not have come here. Because once he came, he would not be able to leave. Wushu's surprise gradually turned into shock when he saw more than 100 celestial beings from Dayu Island slowly flying toward him. Among these celestial beings, there were more than 20 Yuanying. They were all at the divine general level. The rest were all above the diviner level. How was this possible? More than half of the Jiang family's 300 celestial beings were killed by him. It had only been 3 months since he last saw them. How could there be so many Yuanying? While Wushu was still in a daze, the Jiang family celestial beings had already surrounded him, just like last time on Dayu Island. However, this time, Wushu's mood completely changed. No, how could there be so many Yuanying in the lower realm? Who exactly are you people? Perhaps because Wushu knew that he could not escape, after taking out the Wuji apricot yellow flag and the white bone soul summoning banner, he locked his gaze on Jiang Yan and tried to get an answer from Jiang Yan. But unfortunately, Jiang Yan seemed to know that villains usually died from talking too much. Thus, he did not answer any of Wushu's questions. Instead, he nodded lightly at the celestial beings present. Formation. Yin-Yang 6 Directions Formation, activate. In an instant, the sky suddenly lit up, and multicolored light filled the sky. Chapter 403. In order to overthrow Tiandu, the 9 Serenities had been planning for tens of thousands of years. They had been waiting for the revival of spirit energy and the rise of the human world. Only then would this ferocious beast from the primordial times finally wake up from its deep slumber. Not everyone wanted to ascend to Tiandu. Those who had successfully broken through to the celestial realm but did not ascend became the most staunch supporters of the 9 Serenities. Just like Jiang Yan, they chose to stay in the lower realm and continue to cultivate. If their lifespan ran out, they would voluntarily give up their physical bodies and let their souls enter the soul crystal in order to continue living. 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, generation after generation, many people chose to give up because they could not stand the eternal loneliness. However, there were even more people who persevered. There were always sacrifices on the road to revolution. Countless people advanced dauntlessly, just to welcome the moment when they were truly needed. Tens of thousands of years passed, and the world changed. Finally, the time had come. Jiang Yan was not the founder of the 9 Serenities, but he was a core member. If Tiandu was compared to the Qin dynasty, then Jiang Yan was Xiangyu, who raised the banner of righteousness high. The 300 celestials of the Jiang clan, they were the disciples of Jiangdong under his command. Jiang Yan was indeed a ruthless person. If he was not ruthless, he would not have been able to sit on the throne of the 9 Serenities. In order to achieve his lofty goal, Jiang Yan chose to sacrifice his own family, thus creating the 9 Serenities. It was precisely because of this that the once glorious Jiang clan of Daiyu Island had now become the arsenal of the 9 Serenities, providing the 9 Serenities with excellent physical bodies. Although the blood of the Jiang clan still flowed in their bones, their souls had long been replaced by others. Of course, for Tiandu, a mere 20 or so yuaning was naturally nothing. What really frightened Wushu was, Tiandu was unaware of this. For tens of thousands of years, people from the lower realm had constantly ascended to Tiandu. However, after these people ascended, what they saw was not the fairyland they had imagined. Instead, they saw all kinds of injustice. They were like black people who had been smuggled into Huaxia. No one would look them in the eye, and no one would care what they were thinking. Those who are not of our race are bound to have different intentions. Ascenders were constantly discriminated against, ridiculed, and ostracized. No matter how high their cultivation base was, they were just lowly people from the lower realms. Tiandu had never cared about the lowly people of the lower realm. In order to show the spirit of universal love of the divine ancestor, Tiandu had always maintained contact with the 5 places of inheritance so that these sinners could ascend to Tiandu in the future. And this was also the fundamental reason why All Saints Valley was able to use the spirit gathering formation to forcibly summon divine generals from heaven capital when Qin Shi flattened them. Absolutely no one would have thought the so-called 5 lands of heritage were actually branches of the 9 Serenities, but this secret was only known to a few people. Everything was under the control of the 9 Serenities, including Qin Shi, the apple that accidentally fell on the chessboard. Since he was on the chessboard, he was a chess piece. It was just that this chess piece was much bigger than the others. From the moment Qin Shi stepped into All Saints Valley, Jiang Yan had already known of Qin Shi's existence. Although he was a variable, he was controllable. This was why Jiang Yan had displayed an almost abnormal enthusiasm for Qin Shi when Qin Shi first set foot on Daiyu Island. It was a pleasure to have a friend from afar. Jiang Yan was guiding Qin Shi, trying to pull Qin Shi to the opposite side of Tiandu. After all, the only advantage the 9 Serenities had was probably information. The enemy was in the light while I was in the dark. Jiang Yan did not know why Qin Shi was working so hard to find Wuxiu. But he knew very well that Wuxiu was not just a divine general. Wuxiu, he was actually Yu Huan Tianzuan's only son. If they could successfully kill Wuxiu, who would face Yu Huan Tianzuan's wrath? It would not be Jiang Yan, nor would it be the 9 Serenities. It would be Qin Shi, who had always been at the forefront. Wuxiu's identity was not a secret. Almost everyone in the great world knew about it. This guy had been outstanding since he was young, but he was mischievous and disliked cultivation. Yu Huan Tianzuan could not do anything about him, so he handed him over to Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spells, hoping that Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spells could guide this mischievous second generation back to the right path. But he did not teach his own son. The consequences were, after Wuxiu grew up, he did not recognize him as his father. No matter the occasion, Wuxiu would always call him Yu Huan Tianzuan, which almost angered him to death. In fact, from the respect Wuxiu showed to Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spells, Wuxiu was actually quite a sentimental person. The reason why he made Yu Huan Tianzuan angry was probably because he had a special father-son relationship with Yu Huan Tianzuan. Yu Huan Tianzuan probably knew this too. So even though he was usually cold to Wuxiu, he was secretly very concerned about this son of his. Through Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spells, he indirectly gave Wuxiu all kinds of Dharma treasures. This was a very strange father-son relationship. It seemed distant, but it was also very close. So, when Wuxiu saw the yin-yang 6 directions array being activated again, a relieved smile suddenly appeared on his face. It was the same array formation, but the person who said it was completely different. Wuxiu held the flag in his hand, already understanding what he was about to face. So, before Jiang Yan made a move, Wuxiu suddenly raised his head and let out a long howl. Yu Huan Tianzuan, oh Yu Huan Tianzuan, this time, I'm really going to fall. Although you can't hear me, but I'll call you again, father. Speaking of this, Wuxiu's expression suddenly froze. Immediately after, he did not forget to ridicule himself. As expected, I'm not used to it after not calling you for a long time, Yu Huan Tianzuan. Did you hear that? Your son is being bullied, remember to avenge him. Father. Wuxiu did not say the last word out loud. Instead, he silently repeated it in his heart. Then, he raised the Wuji apricot yellow flag high up, and like the only remaining flag bearer on the battlefield, he charged towards the 9 underworlds led by Jiang Yan alone. Even if the entire army was killed, the flag bearer could not fall. If he fell, it would be a true annihilation. Jiang Yan looked at Wuxiu coldly. Even though Wuxiu was surrounded, Jiang Yan did not let his guard down at all. Instead, he decisively ordered everyone to attack at the same time, not giving Wuxiu any chance of survival. In an instant, a bloody light lit up the sky. From afar, it was as beautiful as the sunset. In the end, this piece of pure land in the extreme north was dyed red with blood. Not long after the battle began, Qin Shi, who was patrolling the South Pacific Ocean, suddenly sensed something and looked towards the north. Bai Hong was confused, so she asked curiously, "What's wrong?" "Something's wrong." After that, Qin Shi didn't wait for Bai Hong to respond. Chapter 404. 9 underworlds came out in full force and set up an inescapable net just to kill Wuxiu. Wuxiu was only a Yuanian cultivator. Even with all his treasures, there was no way he could defend against 20 Yuanian cultivators and countless golden core cultivators. Although Wuxiu knew that he had no chance of winning, he did not lose his fighting spirit. Instead, he exploded with a fighting spirit that was far stronger than before. This was the most serious battle he had ever fought in his life. Even a trapped beast would put up a fight, let alone a human. He was a divine general of Tiandu and the only son of Yuhuan Tianzuan. He represented Tiandu, so even though he knew that he would die, he had to die with dignity. Therefore, Wushu decided to burn his Yuanying. He did not want to run anymore. The scenery at the North Pole was not bad. It would be one of the happiest things in his life to be able to sleep here. After Wushu let out a long roar, his body began to burn like firewood. At that moment, blood dyed the sky red. The sound of spells exploding could be heard continuously. It was as if the spell was playing a requiem for this arrogant and slightly neurotic man. The burning of Yuanying would not last for long. Therefore, the battle quickly came to an end. This was a battle that seemed short, but was actually extremely tragic. Wushu thought that killing one was enough, and killing two was worth it. When he was about to die, he actually used a secret technique to detonate the yellow flag and white bone soul summoning flag in his hands. The two 9th grade spirit treasures exploded at the same time, destroying the souls of the 3 Yuanying stage cultivators closest to him on the spot. At the same time, the yin and yang 6 directions formation was successfully shattered, causing the spiritual energy to dissipate, which successfully attracted Qin Shi's attention. As for Wushu himself, of course, he was also turned into a wisp of smoke in the explosion. From now on, there would be no more divine general named Wushu in this world. Reporting to Yuzun, Wushu's Sumera mustard seed bag has been found. The formation imprint has been destroyed according to your orders. Please give us the order. Very good, let's retreat. It's time for our old friend to take the stage. The 9 Serenities had lost 3 Yuanying in this battle, but Jiang Yan did not seem to feel the slightest bit of heartache. Instead, he calmly ordered his men to clean up the battlefield as quickly as possible. He knew that Qin Shi would come, so he had to hide everything before Qin Shi arrived. Otherwise, where would he find such a good scapegoat? After receiving Jiang Yan's order, the generals of the 9 Serenities did not even bother to clean up the battlefield. They quietly retreated like a receding tide, leaving behind only the messy aftermath of the battle. Qin Shi rushed to the Arctic Circle as fast as he could. His intuition told him that this true essence fluctuation was not simple. But unfortunately, Qin Shi was like the police in the movies. He was always the last to arrive. By the time he arrived at the scene of the incident with Bai Hong, everything had disappeared. All that was left was a shattered ice field that seemed to have experienced a carpet bombing. Some broken spell imprints were vaguely left in the air. Qin Shi silently sensed them. He felt that these spells were familiar, but he could not tell where he had seen them before. It was very strange. It was a bit like the Jiang family's true 6 trigram spell, but it was much more exquisite. It was far beyond the level of the Jiang family. Qin Shi knew the ins and outs of Daiyu Island very well, so he did not even think about Jiang Yan. Therefore, he could not even figure out what had happened here. Who was fighting? What level of battle was it? Judging from the true essence fluctuation that he had sensed earlier, the level of this battle was far beyond Qin Shi's imagination. The Battle of the Yuanying. When did Earth become so terrifying? Qin Shi silently sensed the spell imprints in the air, trying to find some clues from them. Bai Hong, on the other hand, began a carpet search in the snow. Finally, under a pile of soft snow, Bai Hong successfully found a tattered piece of cloth about the size of a fingernail. This rag was yellow with golden threads embroidered on it. It was obviously not an ordinary item. Bai Hong picked up the tattered piece of cloth and carefully rubbed it in her hand. Immediately after, he seemed to have suddenly thought of something, and even his pupils couldn't help but dilate a lot. This is the Wuji apricot yellow flag. Bai Hong did not dare to believe his guess. He tried to sense some spiritual energy from it, but this rag was no different from an ordinary tablecloth. Other than the brighter color, there was nothing special about it. Under normal circumstances, magic treasures could be recycled and reused. For example, Chen Shi had recycled Qing Yuan's spear. But if this magic treasure was a natal magic treasure, and its owner used a secret technique to detonate it, this magic treasure would be completely destroyed. Even if it was picked up, it would take up too much space. In an instant, Bai Hong's mind went blank. After staring blankly for a long while, he began to search in the snow as if he had gone mad. Chen Shi noticed his abnormal behavior, so he stopped what he was doing and used his divine sense to help Bai Hong search. This search was incredible. After Chen Shi picked up a palm-sized rag from the snow, Bai Hong was stunned. "It's Wushu, it's really him." Hearing this, even Chen Shi couldn't help but be stunned. Wushu. This guy was covered with high-level magic treasures to defend himself, and he had the blood escape technique to save his life. Even he was not 100% sure that he could kill Wushu. Who on earth could do it? At the same time, the Great World. Tiandu. Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan was currently standing in a pavilion filled with candlelight. Next to each candle was a small wooden tablet with different names written on it. It looked like a memorial tablet in the ancestral hall. Yuhuan Tianzuan picked up one of the wooden tablets with trembling hands. The wooden tablet had the words Wushu written on it. He seemed to be a little unable to believe what he saw. So after picking up the wooden tablet and carefully touching it, Yuhuan Tianzuan picked up the candle next to it. The other candles were still burning well, but this one was extinguished. "Wushu, my son, can you tell father, what did you encounter in the lower realm?" This was the heart fire lamp. Every day, when a newborn was born, the heart fire would be used as a lamp. The heart fire lamp could not be extinguished. Once it was extinguished, it meant that the owner of the lamp was dead. And this was the so-called, when the person died, the lamp went out. Although Yuhuan Tianzuan was the supreme of Tiandu, after seeing Wushu's heart fire lamp go out, he couldn't help but shed 2 lines of hot tears. But a celestial lord was a celestial lord after all. Even if the grief in his heart was extreme, he had to wait until this grief subsided before he stepped out of the attic again. "Pass down my orders. Order the 5 divine generals to return immediately and take the heaven-bearing efficacious floating mirror, build the soul bridge, open the gate of heaven." Chapter 405. Following the extinguishment of the heart flame lamp, Yuhuan Tianzuan, in a fit of rage, officially put the opening of the divine gate on the agenda. For a moment, the great world was in a state of panic and trepidation. Under the influence of the 9 underworlds, the seemingly tranquil earth gradually became turbulent and unpredictable, with undercurrents surging. Chen Shi had always wanted to stay out of this, but he did not know that he had already become a chess piece in Jiang Yan's hands. He and Bai Hong searched the Arctic tundra for a long time before they finally had to believe Wushu was most likely dead. Otherwise, how could they explain the destruction of the Wuji apricot yellow flag? If it wasn't a last resort, no one would detonate their life source magic weapon. This was a 9th-grade spiritual treasure. Once combined with the other 4 flags, it could form a treasure comparable to the Tianyan sword. Therefore, Chen Shi really could not understand, who on earth could have forced Wushu to such a state. If even Chen Shi could not figure it out, Bai Hong naturally could not figure it out either. Changli's death at Chen Shi's hands was pardonable. After all, the 3 of them together were no match for Chen Shi, not to mention Changli alone. During this period of time, Chen Shi had been with Bai Hong, so Wushu's murderer was definitely not Chen Shi. But then who could it be? Other than the heavenly venerate, Bai Hong really could not think of anyone else who had such ability. When did the lower realm become so dangerous? Chen Shi and Bai Hong had the same question in their hearts. But the most important question was not this question, but, now that Wushu was dead, where should they go to find the soul mirror? She had no choice but to bring Bai Hong back to Shangjing and let him see Qin Ruoying, who was still in a coma. Qin Ruoying had been in a coma for more than half a month. During this time, she had not woken up. Her pulse and breathing were still normal, so she looked like a vegetable. She could not accept this result. Neither could Nian. Therefore, she clearly told Bai Hong, if Ying did not wake up, then he could only bring Bai Hong to the Divine Gate personally. Bai Hong followed Shi to the kindergarten to sneak a peek at the cute little fellow and completely believed Shi's words. But unfortunately, Bai Hong was just an ordinary divine general, so his knowledge was limited. Therefore, after seeing Qin Ruoying's condition, he could only frown and analyze. After Changli went missing, Yu Huan Tianzuan gave the soul mirror to Master so that he could send people to the lower realm at any time. Master loved, of Wushu of Wushu of Wushu Master's Master, Fong of Wushu of Heaven, of Wushu of Heaven of the Divine of Heaven, of Wus of Heaven S. Speaking of this, Bai Hong suddenly stopped, and then put on a thoughtful expression. At this point, Bai Hong already knew that Shi had fought with Wushu and forced him to use the blood escape technique. Therefore, after thinking for a while, he continued, I didn't know that Wushu had already descended. Since you forced Wushu to use the blood escape technique, he must have been severely injured. Wushu couldn't force open the Divine Gate on his own, so he stayed in the lower realm to recuperate, and you just said that your wife has been unconscious for half a month. If that's the case, the soul mirror can't be in Wushu's hands. He must have left the soul mirror in Divine Capital before he descended. Hearing this, Shi was stunned. Wasn't this King nonsense? After going in such a big circle, he still had to enter the Divine Gate to solve the problem. Shi's patience had run out. So without saying a word, he pulled Bai Hong and flew directly to the sky above Shangjing City. Opening the Divine Gate required a spirit energy tide, right? There was no spirit energy tide now, right? At most, he could artificially create a spirit energy tide. Shi had already thought it through. He was not going to Divine Capital to fight, but to reason with them. As long as he could solve Ying's illness, he didn't even mind becoming friends with Divine Capital. A soul formation stage cultivator had taken the initiative to express his goodwill. Presumably, any faction with a brain wouldn't refuse. Bai Hong was shocked by Shi's courage. He was imprisoned by Shi for more than half a year, and he dreamed of returning to Divine Capital. Seeing that Shi took the initiative to take him back, Bai Hong was naturally happy, so he wanted Shi to bring Qing Huan and Shui Xiang along. As long as the three of them could return to Divine Capital safely, Bai Hong promised to let bygones be bygones. He was also willing to recommend Shi so that Shi could smoothly obtain the soul mirror. After all, Shi just wanted to borrow the soul mirror, not occupy it permanently, so the heavenly venerables wouldn't be so stingy. The two reached a consensus. Then, Shi used himself as the eye of the formation and the entire Shangjing city as the formation pattern to forcibly set off a huge spirit energy storm in the sky. A steady stream of spirit energy rushed to the center of the storm. In less than a while, this storm evolved into a turbulent tide of spiritual energy. Taking advantage of the gap between Shi's maintenance of the tide, Bai Hong hid at the side and frantically grasped the spirit energy of heaven and earth. Under the nourishment of the spirit energy, Bai Hong's skin gradually became white and rosy, so much so that he looked much younger. Shi used his own vital essence to gather the tide. This action was like reaching into a water tank and stirring it, forming a waterspout in the water. The whole process didn't require too much effort, so Shi could persist for a long time. But he didn't know the reason. Shi maintained it from noon to afternoon. The tide was getting bigger and bigger, but the Divine Gate still didn't open. Now that Nian was about to finish school, Shi hesitated again and again, and finally had to temporarily withdraw his vital essence. Then, he turned to look at Bai Hong and asked, "What's the situation? Why hasn't the divine gate opened?" Hearing this, Bai Hong also looked around in confusion. It didn't make sense. Wushu's life and death were unknown. Didn't Yuan Tianzuan send someone down to check the situation? There were two conditions to open the divine gate. One was the appearance of a powerful spirit energy tied in the lower realm, and the other was the heavenly effecate floating mirror. Under normal circumstances, once a spirit energy tide appeared in the lower realm, Tiandu would use the heavenly effecate floating mirror to open the divine gate so that sinners in the lower realm could ascend. Of course, Tiandu would also occasionally send divine generals down to the lower realm to carry out various missions, such as Bai Hong and Wushu. Wushu's identity was extraordinary. How could Yuan Tianzuan, as his father, not be worried at all? "I don't know, maybe something happened up there. Why don't we try again tomorrow?" Chen Shi was speechless. After glaring fiercely at Bai Hong, he flew back to Shangjing City without a word. Seeing this, Bai Hong hurriedly chased after him and asked, "Hey, where are you going?" "To pick up my child from school." "Why didn't the divine gate open?" That was because Tiandu was using the soul mirror as the core to prepare to build a soul bridge. Wushu's unexpected death made Yuan Tianzuan, who had been hesitating, finally make up his mind. Because of this, the heavenly venerables also reached a consensus. So when the soul bridge was completed, Chapter 406. January 26th. The little girl, who had been in kindergarten for a semester, finally welcomed the first winter break in her life. Before the break, the teacher held a class meeting to remind the parents of the things to pay attention to during the break. At the same time, she gave the children a winter break homework. The winter break homework of the kindergarten was naturally not as exaggerated as that of the middle school. At most, it was only 2 or 3 pages. The content was mainly to write numbers from memory, review pinyin, memorize nursery rhymes, and so on. She only hoped that the children would not forget all the things the teacher taught after the winter break. "Goodbye, teacher. I'll miss you. Nian Nian, good girl. I'll wait for you at school. See you next semester, goodbye." The little girl nodded her little head like she was pounding garlic. After waving goodbye to the teacher reluctantly, she turned her head to look at the 2 brothers. Now that the 2 brothers were sent to and from school by Xia Kaiji, they naturally could not go to school with her every day. Now that the winter break was finally here, the 3 children agreed to meet at the tea house tomorrow and then go to the ice rink to play. Wen, Mingming, see you tomorrow." The little girl held Qin Shi's hand and waited very politely until Xia Kaiji's car started. Then, she turned around and followed Qin Shi home. The closer it was to the end of the year, the more deserted Shangjing City seemed. Every time the little girl breathed, she would exhale a stream of hot air. She thought it was very fun, so from time to time, she would raise her little head and then imitate the dubbing in the short video. She would pout her mouth and shout a Chinibu line, "The evil dragon roars a woo-woo." The little girl was like a cute little sun. Even in this cold winter, she could still bring some warmth to Qin Shi. The father and daughter held hands and walked slowly on the street. Before Qin Shi could find a topic to talk about, the little girl asked first as usual, "Daddy, is mommy better today?" "Yes, she's better. She just got up and steamed some soup dumplings for you. When you get home, it'll be ready." Chen Shi gently squeezed the little girl's little hand and a bright smile appeared on his face. The little girl did not have any doubts about this. This was because the food her mother made tasted obviously different from the food her father made. She could tell. When it came to eating, the little thing was obviously a little greedy, so it shook Qin Shi's arm and laughed. "Mommy's soup dumplings are also very delicious. I can eat 3. "Really? Daddy will bring you 3 in a while. You have to finish them all." No problem. She carefully coaxed the little fellow. He didn't want Nian to know that Roying had been sick in bed, so he deliberately cooked ordinary food from time to deceive the little girl and tell her that it was her mother who cooked it. At first, the little fellow was naturally convinced. But after a long time, the little fellow still felt a little strange. Since her mother could wake up to cook for her, why couldn't she wait until school was over before going to bed? The little guy blinked his big eyes and suddenly realized, I haven't talked to my mother for a long time. Every time she came home, her mother was sleeping, so she could only watch TV silently. She didn't dare to run around the room because she was afraid of disturbing her mother. Ever since her mother fell ill, the house had become a lot more deserted. It was just that the little fellow was still young, so she didn't understand the true meaning of the word deserted. Daddy, when will mommy get better? Soon. The doctor said that mommy doesn't have any major problems. She just needs to rest for a period of time to recover. Similar conversations kept repeating. The little fellow was distressed because of her mother's illness. How could she not be distressed? He would set off a spirit energy tide in the sky above Shangjing City every day, but he had never seen the divine gate open. Therefore, Shi's heart tightened. He just wanted to go to Tiandu to seek a soul mirror to cure Qin Ruoying's illness. Why did the divine gate refuse to open? Did he have to wait for the spirit energy tide to appear naturally? She was very distressed. But this kind of distress couldn't be shown in front of the little fellow. Therefore, he felt as if his heart was being pressed under a big rock, and he almost couldn't breathe. When would these days come to an end? She talked to the little fellow as he secretly pondered. The father and daughter soon returned home. As soon as she entered the door, the little fellow saw Bai Hong walking back and forth in the courtyard, so she took the initiative to wave at him and smiled. Uncle Bai. Good afternoon. I'm out of school. Hearing this, Bai Hong seemed to have something on her mind. After forcing a smile at the little fellow, she looked at Shi with a face full of apprehension. For the sake of convenience, Shi left Bai Hong in the courtyard for this period of time. With the restriction guarding, he wasn't afraid of Bai Hong stirring up any storms. After all, this guy had just burned his yuanying and was almost a cripple now. Shi and Bai Hong looked at each other, but found that Bai Hong's expression was very strange today. It seemed like he was afraid of something. Why would Bai Hong be afraid? This guy didn't even care about his life. Why would he be afraid? Thinking of this, Shi asked with a puzzled face, "What's wrong with you?" However, after hearing Shi's question, Bai Hong seemed to be agitated and couldn't help but tremble. Then, he pointed to the west wing with a panicked face. West wing. Shi was stunned. Immediately, he understood what Bai Hong was afraid of. Then, Shi's figure suddenly disappeared from the little fellow's side. When he appeared again, he was already at Qin Ruoying's bedside. In the room, Qin Ruoying was still lying quietly on the bed. Shi came to her side and wanted to reach out and touch his lover's cheek, but at this moment, his hands suddenly began to tremble uncontrollably. The moment his fingers touched Ying's cheek, Shi froze. At this moment, time seemed to have frozen. Shi's consciousness was rapidly pulled away, as if his soul had left his body. Even though his lover was close at hand, he felt that he was getting further and further away from Ying. Finally, Shi's trembling fingertips touched Qin Ruoying's cheek. But where he touched, it was ice cold. In fact, how sensitive were Shi's 5 senses? From the moment he stepped into the room, he realized that Qin Ruoying's breathing had stopped. This news came too suddenly, like a bolt from the blue, and instantly stunned Shi. Ying had stopped breathing. How could it be? He just went to pick up Nian from school. How long had he been delayed? What exactly happened? Bai Hong, tell me. Chapter 407. What the hell was going on? Chen Shi's mind went blank, leaving only this question echoing in his heart. No pulse, no breathing, no heartbeat, even the blood had stopped flowing. In medical terms, death in the absolute sense meant that there was no heartbeat and the brain was dead. At this moment, Qin Ruoying completely fit this description. So in terms of scientific theory, she was already dead. And this was what Chen Shi couldn't figure out at all. It wasn't an exaggeration to say, even if the entire human race died, Qin Ruoying couldn't die. Not to mention that Qin Ruoying's cultivation had already reached the diviner level, and she was immune to all kinds of poisons. Moreover, she had Chen Shi, a high-level immortal cultivator, by her side to take care of her. Her heartbeat had stopped, right? Then let the heart beat again. Her blood had stopped flowing. Then let the blood flow again. Chen Shi tried to use his true essence to forcefully awaken Qin Ruoying's body. This method was indeed effective. Qin Ruoying's heart began to beat slowly, and her breathing gradually stabilized. But once Chen Shi withdrew his true essence, Qin Ruoying's body immediately stopped functioning like a machine that had lost power. Everything was because her soul had dissipated. Qin Ruoying didn't condense a golden core, and she didn't have yuanying. The dissipation of her soul meant that she was completely dead, and even a golden immortal wouldn't be able to save her. Ying died just like that. Chen Shi stared blankly at his lover's face. In a trance. He actually remembered the bits and pieces of their past. Since Shanghai University, the two of them had known each other and loved each other. Although they didn't verbally promise to grow old together, they both hid that promise deep in their hearts. Please take care of me for the rest of my life. Except for Chen Shi's sudden disappearance for 5 years, the two of them hadn't experienced many storms in their relationship. Chen Shi returned from the heavenly jade realm after a long and arduous journey. What welcomed him was the precious baby that Ying had left behind for him, Chen Nian. My name is Chen Nian. You can call me Nian Nian. Chen Nian, Chen Nian. He was filled with longing. Later on, Chen Shi took Nian Nian to look for Qin Ruoying all over the world. When the two met again after 500 years, Ying directly gave him a slap in the face. At the same time, she also said her wish, may you leave for half your life, and return as a young man. How could there be no twists and turns in life? However, from the moment the family of three reunited, all the hardships Chen Shi had experienced had turned into dust, swept into the garbage heap by him. Chen Shi had no attachment to the past because the future was right beside him. Undying love was not something that could be proven by martyrdom. A heart full of love was not something that could only be heard when it was always on the tip of the tongue. The highest level of love, actually, it was just that old saying, holding your hand, growing old with you. That was all. If you win, I am willing to accompany you to rule the world. If you lose, I am willing to accompany you to make a comeback. When I rule the world, I will spread 10 miles of red dowry. I am willing to use 10 miles of red dowry as a gift, and I am willing to use the world as a betrothal gift. Are you willing to rule the world, and spend the rest of your life with me? Chen Shi did not strive for the world, so Ying accompanied him in a small tea house by Ho Hai. When she had nothing to do, she would flip through books, take care of the children, and watch the flowers bloom and wilt in front of the courtyard with her lover. She would gaze at the clouds in the sky. Was there anything more blissful in the world than this? Chen Shi could answer with absolute certainty, absolutely not. But now, his happy life had completely turned into bubbles. Thinking of this, Chen Shi could not help but suddenly wake up from his memories. Only then did he realize that his face was already covered in tears. He gently lowered his head and left a kiss on Qin Ruoying's lips. Only then did he hold his lover's hand and solemnly promise, Ying, wait for me. There was no need to say more with just these 4 words. Even if I can't reincarnate in this life, I will still create havoc in the underworld and strike your name from the book of life and death. The little fellow stood in the courtyard with a blank face. Where did Daddy run off to? She looked around and did not see Chin-Chi's figure. Carrying her small bag, she eagerly ran towards the west wing. But just as she was about to step on the stairs, an earth-shattering roar resounded through the sky. Bai Hong! Tell me. What is going on? The little fellow was startled by this thunderous roar and almost fell to the ground. If it were not for the big cat's quick-wittedness and supported her from behind, this little fellow would probably have fallen to the ground and rolled several times. The little fellow was still in a state of shock. Before she could regain her senses, she suddenly felt a strong gust of wind blowing from behind. The cold wind burrowed into the little fellow's back and immediately made her shiver. She hurriedly looked back and found that Uncle Bai, who was still in a daze in the courtyard just now, was nowhere to be seen. The little fellow was frightened by this strange atmosphere and carried the big cat directly into the west wing. At the same time, she did not forget to shout, "Daddy! Daddy! Where are you? Daddy is in the sky." Because the little fellow was in the courtyard just now, Chin-Chi was furious and directly grabbed Bai Hong's neck and lifted him into the sky. Cough, 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 I don't know either. Everything was fine just now, but suddenly there was no breath. Bai Hong struggled to reply. This time, he was really sitting at home, but the trouble came from the sky. Bai Hong was, after all, a divine general. Although his cultivation was not even a tenth of it, his 5 senses were still very sharp. Just now, he was meditating in the room to heal his wounds when he suddenly discovered that there was no breath in the west wing. He wanted to go in to check on the situation, but was blocked by the restriction set up by Chin-Chi, so he could only wait in the courtyard for Chin-Chi to return. It was fine if Chin-Chi did not come back. But this time, he had almost lost his life. In reality, Chin-Chi also knew that this matter had nothing to do with Bai Hong. He even guessed that this definitely had something to do with the spirit mirror. Otherwise, who in this world would be able to cause Ying-Ying's soul to scatter without a sound? I'll tell you. If anything happens to Ying-Ying, I'll definitely bury your Tiandu with her. Chin-Chi was like an enraged lion, roaring at Bai Hong. Without waiting for Bai Hong to explain, he directly dragged Bai Hong and flew toward the Pacific Ocean. Although Bai Hong was not afraid of death, Qin Ruoying's current situation clearly had something to do with Tiandu, so he more or less felt that he could not face Chin-Chi. So, Bai Hong obediently kept his mouth shut, waiting to see what Chin-Chi wanted to do next. Chin-Chi was angry, but he did not lose his mind because of it. Since Ying-Ying's soul had dissipated, the most important thing now was not to directly find her soul, but to find a way to protect Ying-Ying's physical body. Chin-Chi could not stay by Qin Ruoying's side at all times to help her maintain her physical body, so he urgently needed a magic treasure now, and that was Shui Xiang's blue wave silk gauze. Therefore, after arriving at the deep-sea cave, Chin-Chi frantically poured his vital essence into the large ice block that sealed Shui Xiang. As long as Shui Xiang's injuries were slightly relieved, her frozen state would naturally be lifted. Under Chin-Chi's continuous pouring of vital essence, the ice block gradually melted, and Shui Xiang suddenly fell from it. During this period of time, Shui Xiang had been in a state of suspended animation, so she did not know what happened outside. Therefore, the moment she woke up, she directly launched an attack at Chin-Chi. Shui Xiang, stop! Seeing this, Bai Hong hurriedly shouted to stop. But Chin-Chi's action was much faster than his voice. Shui Xiang did not even use the first move, and Chin-Chi had already inserted countless spirit needles into her body. You! Shui Xiang's almond-shaped eyes widened, and after glaring at Chin-Chi fiercely, her body completely softened. At this time, Bai Hong on the side let out a long sigh of relief. He was not afraid of death, but he was very afraid of his junior brothers and sisters dying for no reason. Fortunately, Qin-shi did not intend to take her life. Take her, let's go. Qin-shi grabbed the blue wave's silk gauze, left a sentence coldly, and turned to walk out of the cave. Hearing this, Bai Hong hurriedly helped Shui Xiang up from the ground, and then followed Qin-shi's pace. Looking at the man in front of him who was silent on the surface, but his heart was filled with indignation. Bai Hong knew. Chapter 408. After leaving the cave in the deep sea, Qin-shi did not rush back to Shangjing immediately. Instead, he flew to Daiyu Island. He had no choice. After all, Bai Hong did not know anything about it. Furthermore, the Divine Gate had not opened for a long time. Even if Qin-shi wanted to go to Heaven Capital, there was no way in. Therefore, he could only pin his hopes on Jiang Yan. He wanted to see if he could find a better solution from Jiang Yan. Therefore, Qin-shi led Bai Hong and Shui Xiang straight to Daiyu Island. As soon as they got close to Daiyu Island, Qin-shi suddenly realized that Daiyu Island's mountain guarding formation had become stronger. Previously, this heavenly dipper array was simply dispensable. Even Wushu could easily break it, let alone him. After not being here for a while, this formation had been strengthened by 3 layers inside and 3 layers outside. Even if Qin-shi wanted to break the formation, he would have to spend a long time outside. Seeing this, Qin-shi suddenly had a guess in her heart: Jiang Yan was probably afraid of Wushu. That was why he strengthened the mountain guarding formation to prevent the same tragedy from happening again. Out of politeness, Qin-shi did not choose to break the formation by force. Instead, he waited patiently outside. He did not have to wait for long before the formation slowly opened. Ha 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 ha, Mr. Qin, how have you been? I wonder why you've come all the way to Daiyu Island today. Before Jiang Yan even arrived, the enthusiastic greeting rang through the air above Daiyu Island. Hearing this, Qin-shi smiled and replied, I'm sorry for coming uninvited. No, I haven't seen you for a few days. I really miss your elegance. Please follow me into the house for a chat, Mr. Qin. A white light flashed and Jiang Yan appeared in front of Qin-shi. Seeing his warm and welcoming face, Qin-shi smiled and greeted him politely. At this time, Jiang Yan's gaze landed on Bai Hong and Shui Xiang. Who are these two? Qin-shi knew that Jiang Yan had a grudge against Jindu, so he deliberately concealed it. They're my friends. They came with me to visit Daiyu Island. Oh, so that's how it is. Please come in. Jiang Yan laughed and made an inviting gesture to the 3 of them, then he took the lead to fly to Serene Afterglow Peak. Qin-shi thought that he had deceived Jiang Yan, but he did not know that Jiang Yan had already known everything about Tiandu. With just a glance, he had already determined the identities of Bai Hong and Shui Xiang. However, with this old fox's shrewdness, how could he be easily seen through by Qin-shi when he was caught off guard? Therefore, the old man pretended that he didn't see anything and led the way. Qin-shi followed behind Jiang Yan. In the process of flying to Serene Afterglow Peak, he suddenly realized that the atmosphere of Daiyu Island was very different from before. Previously, Daiyu Island was like a paradise. Then, he sighed and said, the Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu is truly pitiful. Actually, I already received the news just now, not only your wife, but also the other Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu who are still alive, even the Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu who is over 30 years old and has already stepped down. At the same time, their souls have been scattered. As soon as he finished speaking, Jiang Yan stole a glance at Qin-shi. However, he saw that Qin-shi's face was terrifyingly gloomy. It was as if water was about to drip out of it. Seeing that, Jiang Yan could not help but feel secretly happy. Seeing that Qin did not seem to understand the reason behind this, Jiang Yan pretended to sigh deeply. Then, he turned around and walked to the back of the ancestral hall. He took out an ancient book. This is the record of the divine gate that the Jiang family's ancestors wrote. Originally, it was not supposed to be read by an outsider. However, this concerns your wife, so I'll make an exception this time. Sir, please read it yourself. Jiang Yan directly handed the ancient book to Qin Shi. After that, Qin Shi began to read 10 lines at a time. The first half of the ancient book was about how the Jiang family became a sinner. Qin Shi was not interested in this at all, so he directly flipped to the back. When it came to the Taiqing sacred ancestor, he began to read word by word seriously. As for the origin of the divine gate, Qin Shi had already learned more or less from Jiang Yan and Bai Hong. The ancient book only made further additions. However, these were not important. There was only one important thing in Qin Shi's eyes, and that was, the arbiter of fate Xian Nu. The reason why the Jiang family did not have the arbiter of fate Xian Nu was actually because of this ancient book. Perhaps it was because the Jiang family's ancestors and the Taiqing sacred ancestor were enemies, so the ancient book unceremoniously pointed out that the arbiter of fate Xian Nu was a backup plan left by the Taiqing sacred ancestor for Tiandu. Back then, the sacred ancestor sacrificed Xian Nu's soul to lead the ancient immortal cultivators to the Great World. However, the Great World was only a small plane, far inferior to the large plane that Earth itself was in. Therefore, the sacred ancestor promised, as long as the descendants of sinners reached the celestial realm, they could ascend to the Great World. The purpose was to let the sinners of the lower realm provide an endless supply of arbiter of fate Xian Nu for Tiandu. As long as the arbiter of fate Xian Nu was not cut off, then the ancient immortal cultivators could once again build a soul bridge and return to Earth. This had to be mentioned. Only when the tide surged could Tiandu use the soul mirror to open the divine gate, allowing the celestials to ascend. This gate relied purely on the power of the tide to open, so only a few people could enter at a time. The higher the cultivation of the person who passed through the gate, the more difficult it would be to pass through the gate. It was like a giant trying to force his way into a dwarf's house. His huge body would naturally be stuck in the door frame. Unless the giant comprehended the true meaning of the word void, he would be able to open a new gate on his own. Otherwise, he could only obediently wait outside the gate. The reason why heavenly venerable wondrous spells could come to the lower realm was entirely because of the cultivation technique he practiced. He could pass through the divine gate with his clone, so he could bring Wushu to the lower realm to check out the situation. Qin Shi quickly finished reading the contents of the ancient book. However, after reading it, his brows furrowed tightly. If that's the case, Yingying's soul didn't dissipate for no reason, but was forcibly taken away by the soul mirror. Using the soul mirror to take away Xian Nu's soul and build a soul bridge that can allow millions of people to cross the two realms at the same time, in other words. Chapter 409. Building the Soul Bridge and Opening the Heaven Gate. Returning to the human realm. Qin Shi wasn't very concerned about this. He only cared about one thing, and that was, the soul mirror. According to ancient records, once the sky-bearing mirror was fully activated, the sky-bearing mirror would be activated. Then, the 5 holy temples in the lower realm and the 13 soul-amassing cauldrons in the various branches would be activated at the same time. From there, they would build a super-large teleportation formation across the two realms, the so-called Soul Bridge. Soul Bridge. More accurately speaking, the Soul Bridge should be called the Bridge of Forgetfulness, right? The River of Forgetfulness beside the Bridge of Forgetfulness. Ancient cultivators walked leisurely on the bridge, but the river of forgetfulness beneath the bridge flowed with the blood and vengeful souls of the Siming Xian Nu. In reality, there were no special requirements to become the Siming Xian Nu. All one had to do was be a woman. As the Siming Xian Nu gradually became a symbol of status, a series of additional requirements were added to the land of legacy in the lower realm. Of course, the Siming Xian knew that everyone in the village respected was actually just a stepping stone for the ancient cultivators to cross the river. The moment they became the Siming Xian Nu, their souls were already offered to the soul-amassing cauldron. Even after death, their remnant souls would automatically fly into the soul-amassing cauldron and be stored in the cauldron as souls. It was only then that the Siming Xian Nu would truly usher in their tragic lives. Because their souls hadn't perished, they would instead endure endless torment and burning in the soul-amassing cauldron until the soul mirror opened. Only then would they truly be liberated. Turning to ashes was a form of liberation. Chen Shi returned the ancient book to Jiang Yan. Then, without saying a word, he cupped his hands and thanked Jiang Yan. Then, he silently turned and walked out of the Jiang clan ancestral hall. Bai Hong had been waiting outside. When she saw Chen Shi come out, she immediately approached him to ask about the situation. But he didn't expect that Chen Shi would grab him and Shu Wei Xiang and fly straight back to Shangjing. As soon as Chen Shi left, Jiang Yan followed behind. However, by the time he looked up, Chen Shi's figure had completely disappeared from the sky above Daiyu Island. Seeing this, the corners of Jiang Yan's mouth immediately curled up into a meaningful smile. Chen Shi flew very quickly and returned to Shangjing in the blink of an eye. This time, he didn't let Bai Hong and Shu Wei Xiang enter the house. Instead, he casually threw them into the alley and used his true essence to control them. Chen Shi had left so suddenly that the little girl couldn't find her father after looking around the yard, so she ran to the room to watch TV. One had to know that although Chen Shi did not waste much time on the road. But this time, he was looking for Shu Wei Xiang and Jiang Yan, so Chen Shi wasted more than an hour. The sky had completely darkened. Under the dim night sky, the small bar by the beach was bustling again. Only this courtyard that used to be bustling with noise and excitement, at this moment, it was still deserted. Even the lights in the courtyard were not turned on. The little girl had been hungry for a long time. However, even though her stomach was growling, she didn't cry for her father. Instead, she quietly curled up in a corner of the sofa. In such a big house, only the big cat was still by her side. "Big cat, do you know where Daddy went?" Meow meow meow, the big cat let out a series of sweet noises. As if to comfort the little girl, the big cat moved closer to her, then stretched out its head and rubbed against her leg. "Big cat, are you hungry?" "I'm hungry too." As she spoke, the little girl rubbed her little belly. She didn't cultivate, so naturally, she didn't know how to fast. The feeling of being hungry was something she had never experienced before. "Daddy's not at home, so we can't run around. We have to be good at home and wait for Daddy to come back and make us delicious food." The little girl hugged the big cat in her arms, then as if to cheer herself up, she pouted and said these words of self-encouragement. Although she said this, the little girl still looked back at Qin Ruoying from time to time, then turned her head to look out the window. It was pitch black outside. Only the sound of the cold wind blowing could be heard. Because of this, a sense of confusion that she had never felt before appeared in her big, bright eyes. Where did Daddy go? The little girl waited bitterly. Finally, Chen Shi arrived home. As soon as he stepped into the courtyard, Chen Shi found that the house was dark, so he used his inner energy to turn on all the lights. In an instant, the lights were brightly lit, flowing with light and color. Qin Ruoying was bedridden, so his sister-in-law naturally couldn't escape this calamity. Qiao Yuan went home for the holidays, while his father-in-law was still in seclusion in his room, unaware of the outside world. Right now, in this huge courtyard of the Qin family, only a 5-year-old child was still moving around freely. But she was still so young, she didn't even know how to turn on the lights. Thinking of this, Chen Shi's expression couldn't help but darken. He quickly walked to the west wing. "Daddy's back." The moment the lights came on, the little girl excitedly jumped down from the sofa, then eagerly hugged the big cat and rushed out of the room. "Daddy, where did you go? I missed you so much." Although they hadn't seen each other for more than an hour, the little girl really missed Chin-Chi very much. On one hand, it was because she was afraid of the dark. On the other hand, of course, it was because she was hungry. Hungry, right? Let's go, Daddy will take you to cook. Unlike usual, Chin-Chi didn't apologize to the little girl immediately this time, but carried her directly to the kitchen. The little girl naturally didn't notice this difference. As soon as she heard that her father was going to make delicious food for her, this little girl instantly threw all her worries to the back of her head, then excitedly rode on Chin-Chi's shoulder, smiling as she waited for her father to make delicious food for her. Soon, the father and daughter had a full meal. After filling her stomach, the little girl clung to Chin-Chi's side as usual, then pulled Chin-Chi to watch cartoons with her. But because her biological clock hadn't been adjusted, before 9 o'clock, the little girl kept yawning. Seeing this, Chin-Chi led her to the bathroom, then washed her up. Wash clean, put on a nice towel, lie on the bed. Hey! Maybe because she was in a good mood, the little girl even hummed the little song that the teacher taught her. Looking at her innocent and cute appearance, Chin-Chi's face finally showed a trace of a smile from the bottom of his heart. However, this trace of a smile didn't last long. When Chin-Chi carried the little girl back to the bed, watching the little girl as usual, tiptoeing to Chin Roying's side and lying down, Chin-Chi could no longer suppress the raging emotions in his heart, and tears suddenly flowed out. This had nothing to do with cultivation. It was the truest feeling in his heart at this moment. In order to prevent the little girl from seeing him, Chin-Chi used an illusion to cover his face. "Daddy, tell me a story. Just one. After hearing it, I'll go to sleep obediently." "Okay, since you're so obedient, Daddy will tell you too." "Muah. Daddy is so good." So, Chin-Chi hugged the little girl, and softly told her a simple and childish story one after another in her ear. It wasn't until the little guy fell asleep that Chin-Chi finally stopped. He quietly looked at the two most important women in his life. They slept sweetly and peacefully, and nothing could disturb them. Just as Chin-Chi had once promised, even if the sky collapses, I'll hold it up for you. I'm Yingying's husband. And also Nian-Nian's father. For Yingying, he couldn't let Tiandu build a soul bridge. Because the moment the soul bridge was formed, Yingying's soul would scatter. So he had to dare to go to Tiandu before the soul bridge was built to ask for an explanation for his lover. But if he went, he didn't know when he would come back. Because he wasn't completely sure. And this was also the first time since Chin-Chi returned that he did something he wasn't sure of. But he had to do it. Chin-Chi wouldn't leave quietly, so he had to accompany Nian-Nian for a night, and tell her everything tomorrow. In order to save Mommy, Daddy had to leave temporarily for a while. "Nian-Nian, wait for me. Daddy will definitely come back." "Hey, in order to prevent the big shots from exploding mentally, let's give them a heads up. This isn't a sadistic novel, and I'm not interested in killing my wife, but the plot has to move forward, right? I can't stay in the tea house all day, can I? Life has to have some ups and downs. Humans only grow when they experience things. Makes sense, right? Long live understanding." Chapter 410. The next morning. When the little fellow slowly woke up from her sleep, the sun was already high in the sky. Because of the orientation of the room, the sunlight shone directly on her face through the window, immediately making her little face bright red. The little fellow rubbed her eyes and then sat up from the bed with great effort. After habitually calling out, "Daddy," she then lowered her head to look at Chin Roying. "Good morning, Mommy." The little fellow greeted her mother sweetly, but Chin Roying still did not respond. She just lay quietly on the bed like that. There was no breath, no heartbeat, and of course, no movement. If one looked at it from a secular perspective, this child actually slept with her mother's corpse every day. Thinking about it carefully, this scene was really strange, and even gave people a chilling feeling, fortunately. The little fellow did not think so. In her mind, her mother was just sick, a very, very sick person. Daddy was busy taking care of her mother, so sometimes he neglected her. The little fellow did not want to cause trouble for her father. Therefore, she called out to her father, but her father did not appear for a long time. The child imitated her father's usual behavior, gently pecked her mother's cheek, and then got up from the bed. Then, the little fellow ran into the bathroom, stepped on a small stool, and began to wash herself. Brushing her teeth was too troublesome, so the little fellow directly skipped this process. She took a towel and wiped her face carelessly, and the washing was done. At this time, Qin Yongyan, who had not shown up for a long time, followed Qin Shi out of the main hall. "Good morning, Grandpa." The moment she saw Qin Yongyan, the little fellow very intimately went to his side, and immediately made Qin Yongyan laugh loudly. The 3 generations of grandfather and grandson sat around the small table and had breakfast. During this time, everything was as warm and peaceful as usual. Qin Shi cleared the table, and then called the little fellow to his side. "Nian Nian, Daddy wants to discuss something with you. What is it?" The little fellow tilted her head, her big eyes filled with confusion. "Mom's condition has worsened. Dad has to go abroad to get the best doctor for Mom. But it's very far overseas. Once Father goes, it might be a very, very long time before I can return." The little fellow did not reply immediately. She pursed her lips and looked at Qin Shi eagerly, as if she was still thinking about the meaning of his words. "Nian Nian, be good. After Daddy leaves, don't be afraid, because Mom, Auntie, and Grandpa are all by your side, and the big cat, Big Head, they will always be with you. Mom and Auntie are both sick. They can't take care of you anymore, but Grandpa can, so I'll have to trouble Grandpa to cook for you and take care of your life in the future. Grandpa is already so old. He's not as young as Dad. He doesn't have enough energy to play with you. Promise Daddy that you'll listen to Grandpa in the future, okay?" Qin Shi gently held Nian Nian in his arms and whispered many things into her ear. He knew that Nian Nian might not be able to remember it. But he had no choice. He still had to say these words to Nian Nian. This was Daddy's reluctance and also his parting words. The little fellow was still young, so she did not know what Qin Shi's words meant. She only remembered one thing, and that was, Daddy was leaving. He was going to a very, very far place. Because Mom was sick, Daddy had to find a way to treat Mom. The little fellow knew what was important. So even if she was a little unhappy, she did not cry and make a fuss to stop Qin Shi from leaving. Instead, she looked up and asked seriously, "Daddy, how long will you be away? When will you come back?" As soon as this question came out, Qin Shi fell silent. After a long silence, he reluctantly squeezed out a smile and said to the little fellow, "It won't be long, you know, Daddy has been abroad before. Now that I have experience, I should be able to come back soon." The little fellow nodded as if she had understood something. Then, as if she suddenly thought of something, she hurriedly asked, "Dad, what should I do if I miss you?" Hearing this, Qin Shi fell silent again. Because he really did not know how to answer. Should he continue to deceive her? Or should he cruelly tell her the truth? Once he left, he didn't know when he would see him again. Just thinking about it was enough to break his heart. The little fellow saw that Qin Shi did not answer for a long time. After blinking her eyes, she thought of a solution for herself. "Daddy, if I miss you, then I'll video call you." "Okay." Looking at the little fellow's expectant eyes, Chin-shi finally nodded decisively this time. This was a solution he did not think of. Now that technology was developing so rapidly, it should not be difficult to simulate his image and deceive the little fellow, right? The father and daughter had a lot of private conversations today. They talked from morning to afternoon. When the sun was about to set, the little fellow, led by Qin Yongyan, personally sent Chin-shi to the door. She tiptoed and took the initiative to kiss Chin-shi's left and right cheeks. Then she said with a reluctant face, "Daddy, you have to come back early, I'll miss you." "Okay, Daddy promises you." While speaking, Chin-shi gently left a kiss on the little fellow's forehead. The father and daughter parted ways. Chin-shi strode away and did not look back along the way. But until his figure disappeared at the end of the alley, the little fellow was still waving her little hand in the direction he left. "Daddy, come back early." After saying goodbye to the little fellow and making a series of preparations, Chin-shi took Bai Hong and Shui Xiang back to the familiar place, Karakoram Kunlun. The closest place to heaven. Chin-shi found the ruins of the Sundial temple based on his memory, then sat down cross-legged in the middle of the ruins. Sitting down, he sat for a whole 3 days and 3 nights. It was not until the morning of the 4th day that Chin-shi finally woke up from his meditation and took out the sound-transmitting talisman that Jiang Yan gave him from his bosom. This was a sound-transmitting talisman that could directly contact Tiandu. It was a rare stock from ancient times. He did not know where Jiang Yan got it from. Right now, Tiandu was preparing to build a soul bridge. No matter how turbulent the spiritual qi in the lower realm was, it was impossible for Tiandu to withdraw the soul mirror that was in use. Since the gate of heaven refused to open, then Chin-shi could only think of a way to forcibly open the gate of heaven himself. This sound-transmitting talisman became the key. Because he wanted to use this sound-transmitting talisman to locate the position of Tiandu and thus pry open the gate of heaven. This was also the solution that Chin-shi and Jiang Yan finally came up with after a detailed discussion. Since the moment Qin Ruoying's soul dissipated, Bai Hong had been reduced to a prisoner again. So he could only be locked to one side like Shui Xiang, anxiously watching Chin-shi's strange actions. They saw, after Chin-shi ignited the talisman, he leaped into the air. Then, under the dumbfounded expressions of the two people, Chin-shi held the flowing cloud sword in his hand, mobilized all the vital essence in his body, and fiercely slashed at the sky. In an instant, the mountains shook, the wind and snow trembled. After 3 days of meditation, Chin-shi gathered all the vital essence in his body to one point. The moment the sword was drawn, the whole world fell silent. Immediately after, the sword qi grew bigger and bigger. Every time it flew up a meter, the sword qi would violently expand at a speed visible to the naked eye. As the sword qi continued to expand, it finally showed a kind of earth-shattering momentum, rolling up all the fluttering snowflakes between heaven and earth, like a pillar that supported the heavens, crashing into the clouds. Only then did Bai Hong suddenly widen his eyes, finally understanding what Chin-shi was doing. He was going to use his own strength. Chapter 411. After 3 days of recuperation, Chin-shi finally slashed out with his sword. This was also the first time he had launched an attack in his peak state since returning to Earth. Of course, the target of his attack wasn't a person or object, and it was the boundless sky. The elegance of this sword could be said to be shocking the world. If one were to overlook the Earth from space, they would be able to clearly see that on the surface of this blue planet, a beam of light suddenly shot up into the sky like a celestial pillar. The dazzling sword light tore through the clouds, and the quintessential essence dispersed like ripples, spreading out wave after wave. Wherever the true essence went, the climate of the area would even change dramatically. The northern part of the land of polar night suddenly became as bright as day. Heavy rain suddenly fell on the parched and scorching Africa. Even Hawaii, which was like spring all year round, welcomed a strange snowstorm at this moment. The clouds were like confetti in a bottle, shaking violently with the shaking of the bottle. As a result, abnormal weather conditions appeared in various areas. The torrential rain had yet to stop, but the sun had already risen in the blink of an eye. The atmosphere became unbearably turbulent, and the turbulence caused by the true essence almost affected all the flights around the world. In the blink of an eye, the emergency communications from the captains blew up the command towers of various airports. Feeling the violent shaking of the plane, the unlucky passengers felt as if doomsday was coming. Some of the pessimists even began to write their wills. At this moment, how insignificant were the weak mortals. Thank goodness. This sudden change in weather didn't last long, and everything soon returned to normal. After all, Chen-Shi was not a villain who had come to Earth to wreak havoc. He just wanted to force open the divine gate with his own strength. He was only one step away from the insightful emptiness realm. However, this one step of difference was like a heavenly moat in front of him. The peak of the divine transformation realm and the early Dongshu realm. It seemed like there was not much difference between them, but in reality, the difference was like heaven and earth. If one were to say that they were only comprehending the laws of heaven and earth before the divine transformation stage, only after reaching the insightful emptiness realm could one truly be considered to be using the laws of heaven and earth. The true essence of the word void was the first law that an immortal cultivator had to master. And it was precisely because of this difference that Chen-Shi could only watch helplessly in the lower realm. Even though he knew that the soul mirror was the source of all suffering, he couldn't go to heaven capital to find a solution. The gate of heaven did not open. Could it be that he wasn't going? Chen-Shi naturally could not accept such an outcome. If Qin Ruoying's soul really dissipated in front of his eyes, and he could only watch helplessly, it seemed that Chen-Shi would never forgive himself in this lifetime. Thus, he had no choice but to take the risk and forcefully open the passageway between the two worlds with his soul formation stage cultivation base. It must be mentioned here, opening and opening were two completely different concepts. The grand pure divine ancestor had built enough connections between the two realms, so Chen-Shi didn't need to open up another channel. He only needed to open up the channel that was originally closed. Just like unblocking the sewers, with the sound transmission talisman as the coordinates, and the glorious Sundial Temple as the starting point. After 3 days of recuperation, Chen-Shi had accurately found the entry point between the big world and Earth through the voice-transmitting talisman. That was why he had made such a shocking move today. With his own strength, he opened the divine gate with his sword. Not long after the sword light was slashed out, Bai Hong's eyes suddenly widened. His lips trembled as he wanted to say something. But after moving his lips for a long time, he still couldn't say a word. This feeling, Bai Hong was too familiar, it was the divine gate. The divine gate was really about to open. As expected. The moment the sword light disappeared, a violent storm suddenly blew up on the peak of the snow mountain where the three of them were. Then, an extremely dazzling light suddenly bloomed from the void. Bai Hong took a closer look and found that although this light was much smaller than what they had seen in the past, the feeling it gave him was no different from the divine gate in his impression. The divine gate was actually forcefully opened by someone. Bai Hong looked at Chen-Shi not far away with a shocked expression. At this moment, Chen-Shi's slightly tired face finally revealed a gratified smile. This sword strike used 120% of his strength. After the sword strike, Chen-Shi was like an ordinary person who had just finished a marathon. He was sweating profusely, gasping for breath, and his mental state looked a little dispirited. However, just as Chen-Shi was about to smile, this light door was like a candle flame in the wind, and it began to shrink rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. Seeing this, Chen-Shi couldn't help but tremble. Are you kidding me? The divine gate was going to close so soon. In a hurry, Chen-Shi didn't even have time to adjust his breathing. He grabbed Bai Hong and Shui Xiang and rushed into the light door as fast as he could. The three of them successfully rushed into the light door. Then, this light door was like a broken light bulb. It suddenly burst out with an extremely dazzling light and then disappeared completely. Everything returned to silence. The wind and snow once again drifted on the peak of the snow mountain. The whistling cold wind continued to blow, and the snow quickly covered the traces left by the three of them. At the same time, Floating Mist Mountain, which was also located in Karakoram Kunlun, but little known to people, Jiang Yan was standing on the peak of the mountain with his hands behind his back. He stared in the direction of the light pillar with his sharp eyes. After the light pillar finally disappeared, Jiang Yan closed his eyes and carefully sensed it. That powerful aura disappeared. After confirming that there was no mistake, Jiang Yan's mouth suddenly curved into a faint smile. Then, the smile on Jiang Yan's face became more and more brilliant. In the end, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. Ha 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 ha, back to Qin Shi and the other two. When Qin Shi grabbed Bai Hong and Shui Xiang and plunged into the light door, his vision suddenly turned dark. Like a loach plunging headfirst into the mud, behind the light door, there was no light, no wind. There was no sound. Qin Shi couldn't see anything. Wherever his divine sense went, it was empty in all directions. It was like a vacuum bag, there wasn't even any air here. Thus, Qin Shi reached out and lit up a ball of light. But after the ball of light lit up, Qin Shi still couldn't see anything. Other than his body, there was only endless darkness in this dark space. Where are the two of them? Qin Shi looked around and couldn't help but feel puzzled. Bai Hong and Shui Xiang were personally captured by him and entered the heavenly gate. But after entering the door, Qin Shi's connection with the two of them was completely cut off. Qin Shi thought that he had been ambushed and subconsciously wanted to draw his sword, but he found that he had lost the flowing cloud sword at some point in time. Right now, he was only left with the training clothes he wore when he set off. Qin Shi had no choice but to search aimlessly in this dark space. But after flying for a long time, he still hadn't reached the end. Along the way, there was nothing in the range of his divine sense. There was no other way. Qin Shi could only try to fly down. But after flying for a long time, he couldn't find the ground. Qin Shi thought that his sense of direction was wrong, so he flew horizontally again. This time, he still flew for a long time. Qin Shi still didn't fly to the border. Where is Tiandu? Where did Bai Hong and Shui Xiang go? What is this place? Qin Shi was a little flustered. Everything in front of him was completely beyond his imagination. How to describe that feeling? He was now like a wisp of dust floating in the universe. But there were no planets in this universe, let alone anything that could be called an object. Apart from him, this universe was a complete vacuum, leaving behind only boundless darkness. He couldn't fly to the end. He couldn't see anything. There was no reference point, there was no gravity, no magnetic field, no radiation, and there was no spiritual energy of heaven and earth. F***ck. Chapter 412. Qin Shi used to think that there was only one thing he couldn't figure out in his entire life, and that was, how did he get to Heavenly Spiral? Who would have thought? Qin Shi hadn't even figured out the first thing, and the second thing that he couldn't figure out had already happened. This dark space was like a small black cell that imprisoned felons. At first, Qin Shi tried to think of ways to escape. But as time passed, Qin Shi realized that everything he did was useless. This place could be said to be, there was no road to heaven and no door to hell. Only boundless darkness enveloped him. Qin Shi released tens of thousands of light balls. For every 100 kilometers he flew, he left a light ball in the darkness. He tried to use the light ball as a reference point to find the boundary of the dark space. But as time passed, Chenshi suddenly turned around and realized that even though the light balls he left behind had become a vast galaxy, he still couldn't fly to the boundary of the dark space. Perhaps this was the true meaning of boundless. After several fruitless attempts, Chenshi's true essence had already been consumed by about 70 to 80%. There was no heaven and earth spirit chi here. If this continued, Chenshi would be like a lamp that ran out of oil before they could find the exit. Chenshi had no choice but to give up struggling. Then, he silently sat cross-legged in the darkness. In order to conserve his inner core, Chenshi didn't even light up the light balls again. The remaining inner core flowed slowly in his body, and Chenshi's brain worked quickly. He started to pay attention to the passage of time: 1 second, 1 minute, 1 moment, 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year. Chenshi's mind was firm. The endless darkness didn't cause him to lose his mind. But as time passed, Chenshi's heart gradually became heavy. He closed his eyes, then opened them. 3 months had passed. This dark space was clearly endless, but Chenshi felt especially oppressed. It was as if he would be swallowed by the darkness at any time. He couldn't accept it. He couldn't accept it. He couldn't accept it. Once Tian-Du built his soul bridge, Ying's divine soul would vanish into thin air. By then, even if the Daluo Golden Immortal descended, he would be powerless. Chenshi couldn't accept being trapped here. Because, he still had a lot of things to do. In a moment of desperation, Chenshi flew up and down in the darkness like a headless fly, roaring loudly. He tried his best to make as much noise as possible. However, this dark space didn't even give him a trace of a reply. Very soon. A year passed. The long period of darkness and the mental pressure brought about by the rush to save Ying's to begin with, Chenshi's to begin to collapse. He grabbed his own hair with a pained expression, and could only let out a series of howls that were close to wailing. "Let me out! Let me out! Let me out, I beg you." His voice was loud and impassioned at first, but it gradually became low and hoarse. In the end, it completely turned into a feeble and pitiful pleading. In the blink of an eye. 10 years passed. Chenshi was in complete despair. He was like a puppet that had lost its soul. He floated numbly in the darkness, as silent as a corpse. If someone were to approach his body, they would hear his mouth squirming. He could still speak, but he just kept repeating this sentence. "It's too late, too late, too late, too late." 10 years had passed. Ying's soul should have long dissipated. Even if he were to be let out now, it was too late. It was hopeless. It was already hopeless. Chenshi clearly remembered every detail when he was with Ying. It was also because of this that the sweetness of the past had now become a sharp knife that ruthlessly slashed at his heart again and again. Self-blame, pain, regret, sadness, anxiety, worry, irritation, frustration, anger, all the negative emotions of human beings were gathered in Chenshi's heart at this moment. If it was possible, he would rather die than stay in this boundless darkness. Fortunately, Chenshi still had a glimmer of hope in his heart. Last year, today, in this door, human faces and peach blossoms were rosy. I don't know where the human faces are, but the peach blossoms are still smiling in the spring breeze. He had already parted with Ying once. He had stayed in heavenly spiral for 500 years, but only 5 years had passed on Earth. Who knew how many years a year in this godforsaken place was equivalent to on Earth? Thinking of this, Chenshi couldn't help but erupt with an extremely strong will to live. Yes. Before determining the time difference between the two worlds, how could he give up on himself? Before the moment the truth was revealed, how could he be hit by his own negative emotions first? Chenshi sat cross-legged again. He didn't want to think about those things anymore. Instead, he began to repeatedly ponder the mystery of this dark space. Since this dark space could trap an immortal cultivator at the peak of the soul formation realm, it meant that this space was definitely extraordinary. Chen Shi directly ruled out the possibility that Tiandu was behind this. It wasn't that he looked down on Tiandu, but that Tiandu really didn't have that ability. Even if the Grand Pure One was alive, it was absolutely impossible for him to play with him in the palm of his hand like this. As such, after pondering over it again and again, Chen Shi suddenly had a guess in his heart. Could it be that there was an accident when he opened the heavenly gate with his sword, and that was why he barged into this endless dark space? Came uninvited. Waiting for him. Or catching a turtle in a jar. He hadn't comprehended the true meaning of the word void, so he didn't understand what was needed to cross the two worlds. A huge amount of vital essence. Obviously, it was more than that. Chen Shi began to think about this problem seriously. Even if he was deep in darkness, he had to maintain a clear mind. Chen Shi kept thinking. But time never stopped waiting for him. In the blink of an eye. 100 years had passed. Let's talk about Nian Nian first. Ever since Chen Shi left, the little girl had been thinking about him all the time. On one hand, it was because Grandpa's cooking was not as good as Daddy's. On the other hand, it was because Mommy had been lying in bed motionless. Without the company of Daddy and Mommy, the little girl was indeed very uncomfortable and was not used to it. Therefore, she had to video call Chen Shi at least 10 times a day. Fortunately, before Chen Shi left, he had already made all the preparations. She didn't know what agreement he had reached with Wu Lian. In short, after Chen Shi left, Wu Lian set up a team to deal with the little girl's video bombardment that could come at any time. Therefore, with the support of national technology, Chen Shi's appearance could always appear vividly in front of the little girl. This also greatly eased the little girl's longing. Detective Conan could lie to Xiaolan until the end with just a phone call, let alone Chen Shi who used a video call. Under the constant comfort of Chen Shi, the little girl also welcomed a new year. This year's spring festival was much earlier than last year. February 4th. New Year's Eve. Early in the morning, Wang Chuanju and Qin Yongwang brought a large group of people to the Qin family's courtyard. In order to make the little girl happy, the big brothers and sisters from the various departments of the Martial Arts Alliance used all their strength. They practically treated her like a little princess. They held her in their hands, afraid that she would fall, and in their mouths, afraid that she would break. With so many people trying to make the little girl happy, even without the company of Daddy and Mommy, the little girl had a very happy new year. Because only then could he go to the bridge of helplessness and quietly wait for the arrival of his lover. Ying, I'm sorry. At this moment, Chen Shi's heart was like dead ashes. He closed his eyes tightly, and the remaining tears flowed out uncontrollably. However, just as Chen Shi was floating in the darkness waiting for death, a ray of light suddenly appeared in the darkness. It was really light. However, the light was very weak, and it seemed to be very far away from Chen Shi. Chen Shi didn't notice the appearance of this light. As his breath became weaker, the light became brighter and brighter. Finally, Chen Shi noticed something strange. He hadn't seen light for more than 100 years. After feeling the abnormality caused by the light shining on his eyelids, Chen Shi's eyelids suddenly trembled slightly. Then, he was like a drowning man, twisting madly in the darkness. Chen Shi used the last of his strength to open his eyes and saw that the light seemed to be right in front of him. Light? I'm saved. I'm saved. The moment he saw the light, Chen Shi's heart suddenly exploded with an extremely strong will to live. He didn't know where he got the strength from, but his body suddenly bounced up, and then he tried his best to run towards the light at the fastest speed. As the light got closer and closer, Qinshi's pupils couldn't help but become bigger and bigger. He was a little excited and a little scared. He was afraid that everything in front of him was an illusion before he died. Thinking of this, Qinshi suddenly closed his eyes, and then plunged into the light. By the time Qinshi's body was submerged in the light was like a firework, instantly disappearing from the dark space. But at this moment, in this dark space that imprisoned Qinshi for 200 years, a woman's voice suddenly sounded. "He can't die here." The woman seemed to be talking to someone. If Qinshi was still here, he would definitely feel that this woman's voice was very familiar, as if he had heard it somewhere before. Sure enough. As soon as the woman's voice fell, a man's voice immediately followed. "This is the reason for your interference. Do you know what the consequences are?" "I know, it's good that you know." The conversation came to an abrupt end. In Qinshi's imagination, the great world should be a planet like Earth. But what appeared in front of him now? They were countless floating islands in the void. Just like in the movie Avatar, these floating islands were either big or small. The vegetation on the islands was lush, and they all had a complete ecosystem. In fact, calling it a floating island didn't seem right. To be exact, it should be called a mountain. One mountain range after another floated in the void. After all, the great world was just a small plane in a crack in the void. It couldn't be measured by the common sense of the universe. There was no sun in the great world, and all the light came from the great sun-moon star formation that the Taiching divine ancestor had inscribed on the boundary of the plane. Under the illumination of the great sun-moon star formation, the great world had a day and night like Earth. He didn't know how big this space was. With just a cursory glance, Qinshi saw thousands of floating islands of different sizes, and the floating island he was on was considered relatively small. The floating islands were either high or low, and each island was surrounded by immortal clouds. Qinshi listened attentively and found that there were vigorous roars of beasts coming from the depths of the forest. Suddenly, a giant golden bird swept past Qinshi's eyes. After grabbing a strange beast the size of an elephant from the forest below him, the giant bird turned around and flew toward another floating island. Such a strange scene was really amazing. This, because Qinshi had just escaped from the dark space, he had a better understanding of it. Thus, Qinshi looked into the distance and set his gaze beyond the group of floating islands, to a place where even the great sun-moon star formation couldn't illuminate. There was nothing but emptiness. It was still that endless darkness. Although there were many floating islands, they couldn't fill up such a huge dark space. This great world, wasn't this the upgraded and expanded version of the dark space? If there were no surprises, this small plane should be similar to the dark space, and there shouldn't be anything in it. After the Taiching divine ancestor discovered this plane, he moved countless mountains from somewhere, and that was how the great world became the size it was today. Mountains could be moved, but where did the rich spirit qi of heaven and earth come from? Qinshi was stunned by the Taiching divine ancestor's extravagance. Only now did he realize that his understanding of the Taiching divine ancestor was too one-sided. This great figure who had single-handedly turned the dark space into a cultivation holy land comparable to heavenly spiral and saved the ancient cultivators, what level had he reached? Insightful emptiness. Tao integration. Or perhaps the legendary tribulation true immortal? Qinshi frowned and pondered for a long time. In the end, he could only put these questions to the back of his mind. After all, he had more important things to do now. Presumably because the great world couldn't produce spirit qi on its own, Qinshi rested for a while and realized that the spirit qi of heaven and earth in the great world was only slightly richer than on earth. Perhaps this was the main reason why Tiandu had decided to return. For Yingying's sake, Qinshi had to stop Tiandu from building a soul bridge. It was still the same sentence. Even 200 years of imprisonment hadn't extinguished the last bit of hope in his heart. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, then Ying would always be waiting for him to save her. Shi hid his figure and stealthily passed through the various floating islands. While grasping the spirit qi of heaven and earth on each island, he quickly flew in the direction of Tiandu. It was a pity that Bai Hong and Shu Wei Xiang had run off somewhere. Otherwise, Shi could have prepared a battle plan in advance. How did Shi know where Tiandu was? Wasn't this nonsense? The island with the densest spirit qi and the largest floating island, wasn't that Tiandu's headquarters? Shi didn't go near the largest floating island. Because his true essence was exhausted, it would take at least 3 months to recover to peak condition. He had endured 200 years, what more a mere 3 months? Shi wasn't in a hurry. In order to be able to observe Tiandu's movements at any time, he lurked on a nearby floating island. 3 months, Ying, wait for me. When my true essence recovers, it will be the time when my true essence ends. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, wonderful book mobile version website, .com. From afar, it was as if Shi was sitting at the bottom of a huge funnel, and Bicker was constantly pouring spiritual energy into his body. While Shi was busy sorting out the true essence in his body, a figure suddenly flew out from the floating island where Tiandu was and arrived above Shi's floating island in the blink of an eye. Shi only took a cursory glance and discovered that this person's true essence was thick and his aura was incomparably powerful. He was at least in existence on the same level as Bai Hong. Divine General. In fact, in the 3 months that Shi had been here, she had discovered a strange thing. Apart from the floating island where Tiandu was, he didn't find any divine general level cultivators on the other floating islands. This was obviously somewhat illogical, as the saying goes, only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you win 100 battles. Although Shi's overall plan was disrupted by the sudden appearance of the dark space, he still learned the general structure of Tiandu from Bai Hong in advance. First of all, the celestial lords of 10 directions, led by Yuhuan Tianzuan and the others, were the core of the entire Tiandu. These 10 people were also the strongest in the big world. Shi hadn't fought with a celestial lord yet, but from Bai Hong's description, Shi could basically conclude that a celestial lord should be equivalent to a cultivator at the divinity transformation stage. As for whether a celestial lord or a divinity transformation cultivator was stronger or weaker, this question was obviously only known to Shi after he personally fought with one. In addition to the celestial lords of 10 directions, Tiandu also had the divine generals of 5 directions, who were respectively in charge of the east, south, west, north, and center. There were a total of 36 people. 10 celestial lords and 36 divine generals of 5 directions. In addition, there were 72 Rakshasa lords whose strength was second only to the divine generals, as well as countless celestial lords. It wasn't that Shi wanted to boost the morale of others and belittle his own prestige, but with Tiandu's strength and foundation, even in the Tiandu domain, it was enough to dominate a region. In the past 3 months, Shi hadn't seen any divine generals or celestial lords, so he gradually became a little uneasy. Could it be, Tiandu had already built a soul bridge and went to the lower realm? Every time he thought of this, Shi couldn't help but worry in his heart, and was very eager to go to Tiandu to see the situation. But considering that his cultivation had not yet recovered, and that he would definitely not end well if he stood out, Shi could only forcibly suppress this terrible thought. 200 years had passed, and there was no point in being anxious. Therefore, Shi had even prepared for the worst. Who would have thought that this would alarm Divine General Tiandu? Now that Shi was done with his work, the dragon's vein naturally returned to normal. Divine General Qin Yang took a closer look, and after finding that the problem wasn't very big, He roared at the elder angrily. Yuan Tianzun ordered the 5 divine generals to gather at the Imperial Extreme Palace, and you sounded the dragon's alarm drum for such a small matter. I think you're trying to hang yourself. Are you tired of living? Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 4:17. The Imperial Hall was the core area of Tiandu, so the celestial venerables of the 10 directions naturally had the most complete control over this place. Although Qinshi had the aura concealment secret technique to protect his body, the moment he saw the sky-bearing technique, he couldn't help but feel a ripple in his heart. That was why a celestial venerable sitting cross-legged in the main hall sensed something strange. And this celestial venerable who keenly sensed that someone had trespassed on Dragon Head Peak was someone Qinshi had long heard of, Yuan Tianzun. Although they had never met before, Yuan Tianzun's reputation had long been branded in Qinshi's heart. After all, apart from being Wushu's biological father, Yuan Tianzun was also the leader of the 10 celestial venerables. If Tiandu was compared to a large multinational company, then Yuan Tianzun was obviously the executive chairman of the company. One could imagine how powerful he was. Therefore, when Yuan Tianzun casually released a burst of true essence, everyone was alarmed. That golden light came too suddenly. After shooting out of the main hall, it was like a laser that pierced through the entire square. Seeing this, everyone couldn't help but look sideways. Just as everyone was feeling strange, a figure appeared out of thin air in front of the originally empty mountain gate. Immediately after, that person casually released a ray of white light under the gazes of everyone, colliding with the golden light that shot out from the main hall. Bang! Suddenly, a huge explosion sounded. After all, it was a battle between celestial venerables, so the few star lords closest to the center of the explosion were sent flying by the dispersing force. This scene was very similar to the school field at noon. Thousands of teachers and students were excitedly doing broadcast gymnastics. Suddenly, the flag-raising platform exploded for no reason. It was easy to imagine how shocked and astonished everyone present was. In the tens of thousands of years of history of Tiandu, it wasn't that no one had caused trouble on Dragon Head Peak Square. But to dare to cause trouble when all the celestial venerables were gathered on Dragon Head Peak. Qinshi was the first. As the explosion gradually subsided, Qinshi's figure was clearly reflected in everyone's eyes. At the sight of this audacious intruder, some nearby immortal generals uttered long roars at once as they rushed towards Qinshi at the same time. How dare you! Everyone, follow me and take him down. I'd like to see which bastard dares to behave atrociously on Dragon Head Peak. What kind of joke was this? The 5 divine generals were in charge of guarding one area. Right now, all the divine generals were gathered at Dragon Head Peak, but someone still secretly touched their faces. If this was a collective dereliction of duty, then what was? The 8 moves swayed 64 times, and the combination changed. The exquisite parts were endless, and the intricate parts were intertwined. Qinshi was now using the first move, sword-raising technique, sword-raising 6 dragons to heaven, grand universe. This sword technique was also the most precious treasure of the Heavenly Evolution Divine Sect, but very few people used it. The reason was not that it was not good. Instead, it was because it was too good that very few people used it. After all, things like cultivation techniques, just like feelings, what was suitable for oneself was the best. The Xuanpu sword technique was not suitable for Qinshi. On one hand, it was because Qinshi's cultivation was not enough. On the other hand, it was because this sword technique was very large and required one to use all their strength. This also meant that the Xuanpu sword technique was not suitable for ordinary battles. It was only suitable for a desperate fight at the end of the road. Therefore, the moment Qin Shi drew his sword, the entire sky seemed to darken. 6 golden sword lights surrounded Qin Shi. The sword hilts were below, and the sword tips were pointing to the sky. Like 6 hungry leeches, they crazily sucked out a huge amount of true yuan from Qin Shi's body, causing Qin Shi's aura to become much weaker in an instant. If it wasn't for the fact that he was forcing himself to look calm and composed, everyone present would have mistakenly thought that he was afraid. The 5 divine generals' Dharma treasures arrived with a loud bang. Qin Shi's sword lights also shot out in all directions. There were only 5 enemies, but there were 6 sword lights. Even if each person had 1 sword, there would still be 1 sword left. Therefore, Qin Shi shot the 6th sword at Yuhuan Tianzuan, who was sitting in the imperial hall. It was impolite to not return the favor. The moment the Xuanpu sword technique appeared, who could compete with it? The vast and continuous sword lights were as strong and hot as the sun. The moment the Dharma treasures of the 5 divine generals came into contact with the sword lights, they immediately trembled and let out a series of wang 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 sorrowful cries. Then, under the shocked expressions of the 5 divine generals, the 5 sword lights showed an unstoppable force, and at the same time, sent the 5 grade 9 spiritual treasures flying. Then, they continued to shoot towards their location. Chapter 4:18. Raising Sword Style. Sword raises 6 dragons to conquer the heavens, Great Qian Yuan. Since this place was called Dragon Head Peak, Qin Shi was going to trample the dragon head under his feet today. Sword Qi spread for 30,000 miles. Purple Qi and green robe flowing east. On Dragon Head Peak. Ultimate Emperor Palace. Everyone, please follow me, riding a horse with a sword, singing to the ends of the earth. After the sword radiance shot out, the 5 divine generals cried out in pain in unison. Then, the 5 of them flew back in the direction they came from at an even faster speed. In an instant, everyone was shocked. But what was even more surprising was that, just as the 5 divine generals were pushed back, a golden sword light brazenly pierced through the square and shot toward the imperial hall where the celestial venerables were with an earth-shattering momentum. At this moment, Yuhuan Tianzuan, who had been sitting cross-legged in the palace with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes with a trace of surprise on his face. The sword radiance seemed to have split the void, so much so that when the sword approached the ultimate emperor palace, the bottom of the palace began to tremble slightly as if there was an earthquake. A battle between experts happened in the blink of an eye. Yuhuan Tianzuan frowned, and a trace of displeasure flashed across his face. He seemed to be blaming the 5 divine generals for their negligence, so when he saw that the sword radiance was about to shoot into the ultimate emperor palace, he immediately raised his hand and summoned the magic treasure that made him famous, the Jade World Glazed Cup. This lamp was in the shape of a tower, narrow at the top and wide at the bottom. There was an inextinguishable golden flame in it, known as the Myriad Spirits Enchanting. This magic treasure constantly revolved around Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan, so its name could be said to be known by everyone in the great world. However, although this magic treasure was famous, not many people had seen its true power. After all, Yuhuan Tianzuan was the leader of the celestial venerables of the 10 directions, so how could he casually fight with others? Therefore, when Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan took out the Jade World Glazed Cup, Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Venerate Xuanjun couldn't help but be surprised. When they looked at the sword light again, even their eyes couldn't help but change. In their perception, although this sword light was coming menacingly, the sword force was not released, so the 2 celestial venerables were unable to accurately judge its power. Then, under the gazes of the 3 celestial venerables, the jade world glazed cup flew out of the Emperor Extreme Palace and collided with the sword beam. Bang! An invisible force swept across the square, and waves of air that were as sharp as steel blades spread out in all directions. After hearing this, Chen Shi's face suddenly stiffened, and he replied somewhat embarrassedly, "It's a misunderstanding, it's all a misunderstanding." At this time, Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Venerable Xuanjun also flew out of the Imperial Extreme Palace. Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spell heard the conversation between the two, so before Yuan Tianzuan could continue asking, he could not help but ask, "In that case, Changli died at your hands?" Changli was a divine general, after all. How could he have died silently in the lower realms? Since this person in front of him had the strength of a heavenly venerable, and at the same time said that he was from the lower realms, in that case, everything made sense. Faced with Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spell's criticism, Chen Shi suddenly did not know how to answer. And his hesitation, it also indirectly confirmed the guesses of the three Heavenly Venerables. Therefore, the scene that could barely be considered harmonious suddenly became like a gas station on fire. It exploded in an instant. Yuan Tianzuan's pupils shrank, and then he muttered in a very strange tone, "So it's you, destroying the foundation of the divine ancestor, cutting off the path of my heavenly capital, Changli, Qingwan, Baihong, Shuixiang, and my son Wuxiu." The moment he mentioned the two words Wuxiu, Yuan Tianzuan clearly paused for a moment. Then, an uncontrollable anger flashed in his eyes. In a moment of agitation, Yuan Tianzuan no longer had the sage-like aura of the past. He was like an enraged lion, he bared his teeth, and his beard and hair stood on end. "You committed all kinds of monstrous crimes in the lower realms, and today you actually dare to come to my Dragon Head Peak to cause trouble. Do you really think that there's no one in my heavenly capital? Hateful. Hateful. Since you're bent on courting death, this old man will make an exception today and send you on your way. You little thief, hand over your life." Before he finished speaking, the jade world glazed cup in Yuan Tianzuan's hand was like a meteor, drawing a streak of light in the air, and then ruthlessly smashed towards Chen Shi.